What's your F this, I quit story? I was a truck driver working a regional route that required me working nights. So basically, I would drive all through the night, deliver a load, sleep through the day, and take a load back to my original place the next night. The thing is, sleeping during the day at a warehouse where yard dogs, the guys that move trailers around a lot of the warehouse with little tractor deals, were constantly moving crap around, knocking into my truck, and oftentimes literally waking me up to move my truck. I was barely getting any sleep, and the only time I had to ever get a good night's rest was during the weekend. So, driving to my first delivery, I told my manager I'm taking an extra day off because I'm exhausted and I have to get a few days of sleep. I was literally getting maybe 3 to 4 hours of solid sleep a day, and energy drinks were worthless at this point. They gave me the go-ahead. I dropped my delivery, slept as best as I could at the warehouse, and picked up the load to take back with a message from my managers telling me to have a good weekend and rest up. When I was about an hour and a half away from my destination, after driving all night for about 18 hours and reaching pure exhaustion, I got a message saying, "Never mind, we need you to work this weekend." Mind you, I know this stuff happens, and sometimes you have to pick up the slack of other employees at times. Things happen. I get it, and 99% of the time, I'm all for helping out other employees and my managers if they need it. But this was about the third time this happened. I haven't had a good night's sleep in 3 weeks at this point, and I kept trying to call my managers or anyone who would answer me, but it was the weekend and no one would respond to their messages or phone calls. I was literally being ignored, and I just snapped. Luckily, the demand for truckers is massive. I mean, I get texts non-stop asking if I'm in the market because a company needs drivers. I haven't even been in the industry for 2 years currently, and my phone still gets blown up with calls and texts asking if I want to drive again. So literally, all I did was call one of the numbers that would contact me constantly and immediately was hired after 5 minutes of talking on the phone. Sent in a message saying I quit and good luck. Funny enough, then they started responding to my messages and tried calling me. I know it was probably a jerk move to F them over, and I normally would never do that, but I just broke. I could not take it anymore. Story 2. Manager claimed to have called me to change my schedule. My phone didn't show any missed calls from his number. He was lying. And then same day, scheduled me to work a shift that afternoon without confirming that I was free or willing to pick up the extra shift. When I came into my next shift, he asked why I didn't come in for my scheduled shifts, showing me my work schedule that he'd printed out. I told him I hadn't been scheduled for that shift, showed him the screenshot of my original posted schedule from 2 days after it had been officially posted that I hadn't been scheduled for that day, and he said it was fine, smiled and nodded, and sent me back to my shift. Next week's schedule comes out, and I have no shifts. I ask what's up. He says that since I missed a shift and didn't call in to say I'd be missing, I had to lose 2 weeks of hours. I again asked why that would be happening if I had come in for my scheduled hours, reminding him we had talked about it. He had said it was fine. He pretended that he didn't remember that conversation. He was absolutely shocked when I quit before the 2 weeks were over. I got a voicemail 3 days later asking why I didn't show up to my scheduled shifts that week, and when I called him back asking what about, I got a new job and will not be back, was unclear. He claimed that he had never called me or left a voicemail, and I must have just been confused. Yeah, sure. Some guy with your voice took your phone, called my number, claimed to be you, and used my name in the voicemail, mentioning my new job and confusion over my new schedule. To benefit who? To accomplish what? That manager got let go a few weeks later. Found out he had been pulling the same crap with other employees. They erased his name from the front of the building and everything. And nothing says finality and bye-bye than getting your name removed from the front of the building. That's like the ultimate slap in the nuts on the way out the door. Story 3. I worked for a group home. We had a difficult group of residents, but the company thinks so much worse. Every resident was 14 to 22 years old. They had moderate mental development delays, 65 to 75 IQ range. They all had a psychiatric disorder, from severe ADHD to schizophrenia, and they had also all been convicted of a violent sexual crime. I worked third shift. My normal hours were 10:30 p.m. to 9 a.m., 4 days a week. About 6 months into working there, they did a massive layoff. They went down to bare minimum staff-to-student ratio each shift, with nobody extra to call in if needed. That meant if someone called out, a person on the previous shift was forced. It got to the point where I was being forced 3 out of 4 shifts per week, and not just a few hours. I was working 10:30 p.m. to around 4:30 p.m. the next day, and still having to come in for my following shift. I had an hour commute each way, so I'd get home at 5:30 p.m. from a 16-hour shift and have to leave the house again 4 hours later. Managed that for about a month. Then one morning I was told last minute I was being forced. Told them I was effing done and walked out. That month took a huge toll on my mental health. I swear, it took me like a year to recover. Yeah, so just props, OP, for sticking that out for a month. I don't know if I'd have lasted a couple of days or, hell, one shift working under those conditions. That's horrible. So glad you got out of there. Story 4. After taking a few days off work while my father was having a brain tumor removed, and still checking emails and attending conference calls from the hospital, my boss gave me a new project. On a Thursday afternoon, she gave me a Monday morning deadline for a project that would take 6 to 8 days to complete. I worked 16 hours a day to get it done. When we met on Monday, she asked how my weekend was. I worked all weekend. And then she asked if I got to visit my dad in the hospital. No, I didn't get a chance because I worked all weekend. A couple of weeks later, she pulled me into a meeting and said, "I feel like you were resentful because you had to work, and I feel like I was really good when your dad was sick. Maybe you're just tired. Are you tired?" She'd also make comments when I would leave the office on time. Not early, on time. "It's great that you just get up and go when your day is over. Like, I have to go because I have a daughter, but you don't have any kids and you just leave at the end of the day." Yeah, female dog, I don't live here. I don't go home and sit in a dark room counting the hours till I get to come back here. I'm also not curing cancer. Nothing we do here matters to anyone outside of here. I give you 100% when I'm here, but when my day is done, it's effing done. I no longer work there. Story 5. I got a summer job while I was in high school at a place that made fiberglass tanks. I was told I'd be doing groundskeeping and yard work. Figured I'd scored an easy gig of bombing around on a ride-on mower and whatnot. Nope. The first day I show up in a t-shirt and jeans, I was told the yard equipment wasn't ready. So they had me cut raw fiberglass for 8 hours with an X-Acto knife and no PPE. Being a dumb crap kid, I didn't immediately quit and did this for 3 more days. At least after the first day, I brought my own gloves and a long sleeve shirt. However, on said fated day 3 was when they were doing tank coatings. So about 10 feet away from me are 2 dudes in full PPE. We're talking overalls, rubber gloves, glasses, face shields, and respirators. 10 feet away from me, in a poorly ventilated room, spraying the exterior of a tank with presumably fiberglass coating. I only made it a few hours before having to go to the bathroom to puke. Was told to quit being a coward and go back out on the floor, so I unfortunately had a moment of not being a stupid kid and said I quit and walked home. Both parents were mad when I told them I'd quit. Joke's on them though, because a few years later, that company killed 2 dudes. A guy asphyxiated while working inside one of the tanks, and the person that tried to rescue him also ended up dying. Whole place got shut down permanently. Story 6. I was doing a manager's job without the title or pay. I was asked to train all our new seasonal staff without any additional pay. I was pulling 12-hour days without being paid for all 12 hours. Then I had my yearly evaluation. She gave me an average rating, and when I asked what I could improve so that I could get a pay raise next year, she said there was nothing I could do. Let slip that they would only be giving an exceed rating to 1 person per store. Performance didn't matter. The minimum wage also happened to be bumped this year. I was making more because I had been there for 5 years. But we were informed that those of us who had been there and were earning the new minimum wage would continue to just earn the same amount, meaning a person who had started a week prior was now making the same as someone who had been there for 10 years. Then, one day, my alarm didn't go off, so I missed my first day in 5 years. I panic called my assistant manager and told him, and got to work. We had just hired a new manager. She was touring the store with some higher-ups. She took that opportunity to chew me out in front of them. I apologized profusely for being late, but that wasn't good enough. She decided to scream at me for only telling my assistant manager and not telling her. I called the store, he picked up, he told me he would tell her. She decided she didn't like me, so she cut my hours in half. The only reason why I kept the job after all of that was because they were still giving me full-time hours and I knew I wouldn't get that anywhere else. Well, if they're just going to give me 20 hours a week, F it. So I handed in my 2-week to a manager I had worked with and loved. New manager took personal offense to this, too, and started talking crap to everyone who would listen. So instead of working out my last 2 weeks of shifts, I just stopped coming in. I was going back to school anyway. I didn't need their reference. I heard that a month later, there was a mass exodus. So glad I got out when I did. Edit. There was also a GM that took glee in bullying me. Last time I walked by the store, he was still there. I take petty pride in knowing that I make double what he does now. I know that's gross and petty, but he was an ass. Story 7. I worked at a well-known pizzeria in my city for a while when I was younger. Definitely put up with a fair amount of crap for the year and a half I worked there. Terrible managers, lazy coworkers for pretty much minimum wage. Well, a couple months before I was planning on leaving to go to school in a different city, they were having an issue with hiring and firing new people because they kept hiring anyone with a pulse regardless of how many brain cells were between their ears. Back in January, I had requested the time for spring break off as I was planning a surf trip out to California. I had the time approved in writing and that was that. Fast forward to March. They hired and fired 3 people in the same week, so it became apparent staffing was an issue. The schedule came out for the week I had requested off and was surprised to see myself on the schedule almost every day that week. I approached the store manager with the schedule and my written approval of time off request and was like, what the F, dude? He then proceeded to tear up my request in front of me and said, we don't have enough people right now, so you're going to have to make some sacrifices. You're just going to have to deal with it. That week was about 3 weeks out, so I made a snap decision then and there and replied, no, you're going to have to make sacrifices. I'm giving you my 2 weeks. I had this trip planned for months, and you can't even ask if it's okay to cancel my trip? The last 2 weeks go the smoothest I've ever worked there. That manager trying everything to get me to stay, and I keep saying no while he decides to retaliate in small, irritating ways. I'd had enough and decided I'm not going in on my last day to close the shop. I'm starting my spring break a day early. About 10 minutes into the start of my shift, I get a call from said manager asking where I was. So I tell him, oh, I'm on I-10 heading west right now. Well, when are you going to get here? Dude, if you haven't gotten it yet, I'm not coming in. He starts going off about how he's going to have to close and work extra since he opened the store that morning, etc. I said to him, sounds like you're gonna have to make some sacrifices and just deal with it. Remember that? I'll be in when I get back to pick up my last check in 2 weeks. And hung up. Definitely the most satisfying way I've ever quit. Story 8. Kinda long, sorry. I was a manager at a company where the executives were ineffective. I worked 60 hours a week most of the time and had to do all my director's duties because he didn't understand our systems. The work environment was also pretty hostile and passive-aggressive. People cried on the job daily in other departments, slightly less in mine. Managers and staff would snap at other departments the same way the executives did because of the stress. I tried to take care of my department and make sure they weren't being abused or taken advantage of. I had 3 days leave for a death in the family, but had to work every day from home and the funeral itself. It was especially vexing because it was to redo the same thing every day that my boss just forgot to complete and need done again the next day. I brought this to his attention, as well as all the other issues, and he said he would try to do better. Months went by, and it got worse. Finally, our team sat down with him and told him things needed to change. I told him that the environment was more hostile and aggressive than ever, and the team agreed. He told me that was my perception and we needed an attitude change, then left for a meeting, which I provided him the data for. I cleared out my desk and left, quit with HR. For me, the kicker was that he kept assigning me tasks and insisted that I was still working there for days. Never been more relieved to quit in my life. Story 9. My first job at a pizza delivery place. I was almost 18 and I overheard my manager, in his 40s, and a few delivery drivers talking about throwing me a birthday party and spiking my drink so they could do things for me. They had no idea I was around the corner listening. Maybe they were joking, maybe they weren't. I didn't care. I quit right then and there. Update. Wow, people seem really interested in my pizza place experience. I thought I'd share some other crazy stuff that happened prior to quit day, all of which should have made me quit a long time ago, but again, a combo of fear and just plain really uncomfortable with confrontation / causing problems. Two lesbian coworkers that were dating each other that would pinch me a lot and tell me how perfect I was for the two of them because one liked straight girls and one liked underage girls. My manager would straight up tell me to show him my tits. I declined. He would get mad if any of the male pizza delivery drivers talked to me for too long. I was called Barbie around the pizza place. One time, I said bite me sarcastically, and my manager bit me. I almost quit from that, but I did get a slap in that I did not get in trouble for, other than my manager saying if I hit him again, he would hit me back. Scared of not having a job, scared of manager finding me at my house, that he had my address, etc. Still glad I finally quit when I did though, and didn't let things progress any further. Okay, I just want to shout out stuff like this, crappy working conditions where like sexual harassment is very much a real thing. The fact that like he bites her, she slaps him, and then he says, if you hit me again, I'm going to hit you. Like, screw you, man. Nobody should feel bullied or extorted like that, period, let alone at work. So, OP, you're doing a great job handling it, at least externally, and glad to hear that you got out of there. Story 10. My first job was working at an Amazon distribution warehouse. Granted, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I figured, hey, I need the money for bills. Starting off, there was interesting to say the least. Hundreds of aisles on two sides of the warehouse with a single conveyor belt separating them all. All of us workers huddling up into groups for stretches every time a shift started. The buzzwords all along the cafeteria made it feel like I was in a cult. Our demographic makeup was a mix of young lady and elderly men and women from all walks of life. As time went on, I was overworked, and I quickly realized the managers didn't give much care towards us. They only loved to show the new expansions of the building with more racks and conveyor belts. They tried little things like rewards and catering from Chipotle and Boston Market, but the workers who've been there since the building opened noted various complaints about working conditions, working in 90+ degree temperatures with no ceiling fans, spillages, overflowing aisles, shifting 20+ pound boxes, scanners not working, etc. My final straw was when I was assigned to shift 24,000+ packages on the new conveyor belts with a woman who was pregnant during Prime Week. The belts overflowed that night. I realized if this was the type of thing I was going to do, then I didn't want to do it anymore. By that point, I lost more than 20 pounds. I weighed 175 when I started, and when I quit, I was 151 pounds. I quit after 5 months with no regrets. Story 11. I'm a nurse, and I was working in a nursing home 2 years ago. I needed a liver transplant from medication used to help treat my arthritis. I was still healthy-ish and able to work at the time. One of the downsides to my liver decompensating is the inability to control my blood sugar, which would drop down into the 50s. Low blood sugar can be dangerous, makes it very difficult to focus, and makes it seem like you're drunk and high at the same time, at least for me. During one shift, my sugar dropped twice. The first time, I ate some protein and took a break to get it back up before I started passing meds/narcotics. The second time, it was in the low 50s. I asked for someone to come take over for me so my husband could pick me up and take me to the hospital. After an hour, they came and told me that there was nobody available, and then I would have to stay to the end of my shift, despite the fact that there were 4 RNs sitting on their asses in their office. I called my husband, crying because I felt so bad and so frustrated. He freaked out and drove to my work while on the phone with the State Board of Nursing and County Health Department. He came in, packed my things, helped me walk to the supervisor's office, and went ballistic. I've never seen my husband angry. We've never fought, so seeing this was kind of scary for me. After lots of swearing, while still on the phone with the county health department so they could hear the exact conversation, he told them I quit, and we left. Edit. A word. I have the most insanely incredible husband. I always say I had to move 1,400 miles to find my best friend and soulmate. Story 12. Office job with a certain family company. 1 year's FTC came to an end, and just before it ended, we had some financial advisors come in. Nothing to worry about. Lies, etc. UKHQ is where I was working. They decided to move the procurement team, my team, to Italy, who also had a procurement team. I was called into a meeting room with my boss in HR and was told there's some downsizing going on, but we'd like you to stay with us. Okay, cool. Catch is that the role role will be based in Milan with the Italy team. And because I'd be on contract again, they can't offer me a moving package or a full-time contract either, so I'd have to move myself. I just said, so you want me to take another fixed-term contract with no guaranteed full-time contract at the end because, let's face it, that's how FTCs work, and the fact that I'm not getting a full-time offer after a year is proof, and you want me to move myself to Italy with no help from yourselves, using my own money for flights and anything I want to ship over, which, by the way, is a country that has pretty darn high unemployment levels for someone in their mid-20s like me. So if this all goes tits up, I'm left in a new country with no help from the company that brought me here. Oh, and presumably no raise either? Well, we've had to reduce your pay to fall in line with what the analysts out there are making. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair on them. Okay, I'm gonna say no thanks and thank you for the opportunity. Story 13. Not necessarily on the spot quit, but it's still a good story. You might recognize it from subreddit Malicious Compliance. I'm a Canadian backpacker that's been traveling Australia. For the past 3 months, I've been working for a prawn company. At the farm, I was very mistreated and lied to on multiple occasions, so I wasn't too fond of the management in the first place. Management has known that today is my last day for a few weeks, but I don't think my manager remembered. For anonymity purposes, let's call my main manager Alan. His first real name starts with an A. I don't know what else to call him. Anyways, my job on the farm is to mix probiotics into the feed using small cement mixers. I work with another backpacker as well. Let's call him Jake. The mixers are in a large shed that has a concrete floor and an open wall to the rest of the farm. This part is key because little food particles can fly out of the shed onto the dirt outside. This happens quite often as it's hard to put all the feed back in the bags without spilling. Around 5 hours into our shift, Alan drives up to the shed and tells us to clean up inside the shed because the two bosses and investors are coming around to see the processes of the farm. So Jake and I sweep up all the dropped food and tidy everything else up, then continue mixing. An hour after we cleaned, Alan comes around and starts yelling at us about how there's prawn food all over the dirt, right outside the shed, and that we need to use a broom to sweep it up before all the bigwigs come and see it. He also told us that we're useless workers and that we're lucky to have our jobs. Jake and I didn't really care because it's my last day. I can handle it. Alan leaves us and we start to clean up. We start sweeping up the dirt/prawn food, and then we realize how silly sweeping prawn food off the dirt looks. Jake gets a fantastic idea to leave it for now, and start doing it when Alan's bosses come around. I love the idea because there's no way Alan would get mad at me in front of his bosses. Eventually, Jake spots the boss's trucks driving up to the shed. It's game time. We get the brooms and a bucket, and we start sweeping. All the managers, including Alan, hop out of their trucks and walk over to us. We're in total view of them, and I can see some of them look confused. One of the higher-ups starts asking us questions about the probiotic process, and I can tell he's trying to avoid the, "Why the F are you guys sweeping dirt? That's on a dirt road." Eventually, after a few questions, he says exactly that. Jake and I look over at each other, then I look back at the boss and say, "I have no idea, we're just doing what Alan told us to." The big boss looks over at Alan confused. The face that Alan made was priceless. I could tell he was steaming mad that we threw him under the bus, but at the same time he had to hold back because he didn't want to look bad. He ends up choking on his words a bit before he can say anything. The big boss says, "Never mind actually, I don't want to now." I knew that when the bosses were gone, I was going to get a ton of crap. After they left, I packed my bag and went home. I'll never see them again in my life, and that is how I quit my job today. Story 14. I was working as an ice cream vendor at an amusement park. It was the kind of ice cream that comes in tiny little flash frozen pellets. So I was selling my tiny overpriced cups of frozen ice cream balls, and has a line of half-dozen people, when a manager came over and said he saw someone walk by with a cup that hadn't been leveled off. I acknowledge his comment and then continue preparing the ice cream cup for the next customer. After filling the cup, I use the scoop to scrape across the top of the cup and level off the excess pellets, because God forbid, people almost get their money's worth. The manager said I didn't level it off well enough and snatched it from my hand, dumped it back in the bin, and made me do it again while standing over me. The customer and I were both now silent and uncomfortable, so I filled the cup and leveled it off again the same way because that's the only way to do it. This time, he apparently approved and said, "That's how you should have been doing it the whole time. It isn't hard." Then he stormed away. Well, the previous day, I had worked my entire shift without a break because the manager forgot to send relief to cover my stall while I took lunch, so I was already annoyed at the company. But being yelled at and belittled in front of customers was over the line in my book. So I hand the customer back his money and then similarly handed out free ice cream to the other people in line. Then I simply left. I didn't lock the ice cream freezer or empty/power down the register. I didn't let anyone know I was leaving. I didn't stop to turn in my name tag or polo shirt. I just effing left, and I've never regretted that for a second. Story 15. Personal story. As part of a college course, I had to get some work placement hours at places related to the field of study. Because it was hard to find available places, they allowed charity shops. We were allowed a maximum of 16 hours a week, and we needed 500 hours to pass the course. When I started, I was averaging 10 to 12 hours, but a month in, I needed a minor procedure on my foot, which meant I had to miss a couple days, after which I would have been fine to return to my normal hours. When I came back, I was scheduled for an hour and a half. They told me they didn't want to push me too far. I thanked them and let them know that I was fine to return to my normal amount of hours and showed them the information pack that said as such. Next week, the same thing happened. An hour and a half for the whole week. There were others from my course volunteering there who were still getting 10 to 16 hours a week. The third week, I asked for my hours to be increased, only to be told that it wouldn't be fair on the others. I stayed for 5 weeks after my hours were cut before I said F it. If I stayed, I wouldn't have met the course requirement. It wasn't the only reason I left, but it was the final straw. The general manager was a bit of a female dog, but the assistant manager was cool. Story 16. I worked at a casino doing security. I had just gotten out of the military where I had previously been qualified in a bunch of things that revolves around security in response to active shooters, etc. One night during a busy evening, the panic/hold-up alarm went off, and the station that sounded could not be reached. It was treated as a legitimate situation. I cleared out my section of the casino and moved to clear our other section/help old people get away. After that, I started clearing staff out as well. It seemed to take the security staff, including the director, a ridiculous amount of time to investigate and/or clear the situation. It turned out to be nothing. Someone bumped a panic button and went on break or something. I was pulled into the office where I was berated by the security staff supervisors for clearing out the building and sending everyone outside. When asked why I did it, I said current FBI guidelines are run, hide, fight. So the first priority is removing everyone from the area that's under threat. The second would be hiding said people, but I was able to remove them so I didn't have to. My director told me that was incorrect. I was responsible for everyone leaving and was going to be reprimanded. Told I had no experience with said situations and should be sent to training again. I asked her to clarify the FBI guidelines, which she couldn't do. When challenged and asked if I ever had active shooter training, I stood up, said I've been trained in responding to the active shooter as an armed law enforcement officer, and that her lack of understanding of simple guidelines was terrifying to me. I told her I quit. I won't be giving my 2 weeks notice. This is the last time I'll be in this building. She laughed and said, well then we won't be able to recommend you as a reference. To which I laughed and said, I won't be telling anyone I ever worked here. It won't help my chances. So that was a comment that I was going to make earlier, but I'm glad that this last sentence here kind of cleared that up. People that just impulsively quit in the heat of the moment and just walk out without giving notice, you just have to be careful and also understanding of the fact that that job basically doesn't exist on your work history if you do something like that. So if you're quitting a job that you've held for 6 years and you just walk out the door, just be prepared for there to be a 6-year lapse in your employment record. So, just think about what you're doing before you act and, resign if you can cordially and respectfully. But I totally get the anger here. Story 17. Man, I have a hell of a story. I worked for Publix in the deli. Started at 21, worked my ass off. Worked 45 hours a week when they were shorthanded. I got full-time in 3 months. Worst mistake ever. The difference between a full-timer and a part-time is that they treat you like crap. Now, I had a great set of managers. 95% of the managers were amazing people. The job itself was hell. Once you became full-time, you work ridiculous, grueling 10 to 12-hour shifts. Sometimes you don't get a lunch until 9 hours in. I started having some health problems, mental illness related, and recently diagnosed with IBS with a couple food intolerances. I started slipping working 12 hours, sometimes no lunches, getting out at 12 a.m. and going back in at 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. They just threw ridiculous shifts at us. One day, they call me to the office and accuse me of a few ridiculous things and ask why my performance has been dwindling. Well, I broke and told them about my recent health issues and that I've been having ideations of self-unaliving recently, and told them I've been thinking of stepping down from working full-time or asking to leave deli to be cross-trained in an easier department. They immediately are like, if you step down, you lose your health insurance. They told me they can't guarantee me over 30 hours in order to keep my health insurance, which is BS because the minimum you get a week is 32 plus, because it's so short-staffed. I told them I needed to be out of the deli. They said they would get me in bakery just for a different place. A month later, more 10-plus hour shifts. A week straight of getting out at 1 a.m. every night. I asked when I would be switched over. They kept saying, oh, next week. The final straw was like the end of that insane 1 a.m. shift because I had to be back at 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. the next day. I walked out the next day in the middle of a shift after spending 20 minutes in the freezer crying because my manager basically told me to get my crap together. Yeah, would never go back. Story 18. I worked as a server at a fancy theater. We were all students, but were expected to be professional servers even though they hired everybody without experience because there was such high turnover rate. So New Year's Eve comes by. Nobody wants to work, and my best friend, female, volunteers to work that night. The night is a huge crap show. The manager already had some existing anger issues because of a misunderstanding. He thought my friend was trying to steal money. What could have been talked about easily escalated to him pushing her against a wall so hard that she dislocated her shoulder. She went to the hospital after because the police told her that she needed doctor's confirmation if she wanted to press charges. 1 week goes by. She decides she will not press charges, and the guy is still working there. She's getting no shifts, and when another server gets sick, she just takes the shift and shows up. The manager that pushed her and a higher manager also worked there, call her into the office and tell her that she's fired. I just took off my apron and walked out with her. After 1 month, about 3/4 of the staff also quit, and it really effed them over. So I'm going to continue to stop the video and call out these domestic and sexually abusive situations in work conditions. Like, people need to know about this, and the people responsible absolutely need to be held accountable. They need to be the ones losing their jobs. This is not okay. Story 19. Worked at the Source, Canada, and had a weird situation. We had a PlayStation 1 in the back that never hit the shelves many years before and kind of just sat there. After almost a year of working there, we got to talking about this PlayStation to find it didn't show a normal price in the system. A month goes by and we're still discussing it when a fellow employee's PlayStation died. Another employee sold him the one from behind at the price listed in the system. 6 months later, get a list from corporate to return items, and sure enough, somehow this many years old item is on the list. The Source came in and cleared house of anyone thought to have interacted with this transaction. I was the only employee remaining. They had me run a store solo for a week, impossible, before bringing a manager from a neighboring town. The manager walks in and starts running his mouth about everyone and everything, literally having me do every single task by myself while he yelled. By lunch break, I had enough. Walked out back, grabbed my things, sandwich in hand, and I walked out telling him to have a great day and went back to my previous tech job. Worth it. Story 20. I had a real POS person for a boss once. My role was pretty senior in the company. I was brought in to fix the company in a bit of a mess. Some of the partners had bailed and the owner was making a go on his own. I was responsible for all the revenue and expenses. After a month on the job and asking since day one, I had yet to see the books or meet the accountant. I started to get a bit worried about how the accountants were handled and even a bit concerned about if there was potential criminal activity, as it was a venue, so there was a lot of cash moving through the place. He was also a misogynist, and when I wanted to promote one of the long-time, really solid female employees to a bar manager level position, sorely needed and not that much of a salary change, he immediately argued that women couldn't be managers. About 2 months in, still no books. After promises, we come to a dark period where we don't have any activity in the building for a few weeks, typically normal. I mention I'm going to work from home for a week to get some operational manuals together, and he insists that all work work needs to be done from the office, which was not in our agreement, and in fact, I had mentioned how important flexible work was when I was interviewed, and I had been basing my hours on taking some time off during the quiet period. During that conversation, I quit, citing the books and an inability to do my job as assigned. He begged me to stay and said he would sort out the finances for me. Now, as I mentioned, we're coming up to a period of a couple of weeks where there's no activity. So I'm in the office working on the operations manuals, and I start getting calls from suppliers that their bills aren't paid. So I compile a list of outstanding invoices and send them to my boss. He tells me not to worry about it, and he'll be back in a month to send off the checks. A month. I wrote a resignation and left it on my desk with a key, sent him an email with the letter, and walked out the door. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from him asking what happened and where I've been. So did you just not read the note, or did you think that they were bluffing? How do you process someone leaving a note, leaving a key, basically saying that they're quitting as, oh, they're just taking a break? I don't understand people sometimes. Story 21. I used to be a server at a restaurant that was a quarter-mile down the road from a large concert venue in northern Michigan. Concert nights were always effing crazy, but paid well, so it was all good. I was assigned Patio, which had 13 tables split between 2 servers. The issue is, my other server didn't show up, so I had the entire patio to myself for ZZ Top night. On top of this, I had a 21 top come in and take up half of my section. They weren't attending the concert, and I told them that due to it being super busy and them being a large group, food would be at least an hour. They were fine with this. I'm with them every 3 to 5 minutes filling drinks and bringing booze/wine. It took about an hour 30 for them to get their food, and everyone was in good spirits the entire time. They ended up staying for 4 hours and raking up a 4-digit bill. Thank you, booze, for that. And everything was fine until I bring that out. It was like a switch flipped. They started yelling and complaining that I was horrible, and all went inside to speak to my manager, who, mind you, had not helped out a bit during the entire ordeal. She comped everything but alcohol, removed the 20% auto gratuity, and the table ended up leaving me $12. My manager then pulled me aside and gave me a warning, telling me she didn't think I could handle being a server. Yeah, I was pretty well effing done. If you're reading this, Barb, F you. You were the worst boss I've ever had. Story 22. Worked 45 days straight, 12 to 16-hour days as a salaried exempt employee as an executive chef in a very high-end and huge catering company. Lots of mega high-end events during the dot-com boom. MTV, Playboy, Mideast Royals, pro athletes, tech pioneers, etc. Not that glamorous. You're there hours before the party, in the kitchen/tents during it, and cleaning and packing up for hours after. Day 46 rolls around and I'm losing my effing mind. 24 years old and getting out of bed like an 80-year-old. I call the owner and say he's going to have to take the shift for a couple days, also a pro chef, because my wife's grandpa just died and we have to be with the family. Go back to bed, sleep till 3 p.m. Wake up, crack a beer, and hop in the shower. Flurry of missed calls. Owner calls me. He's at an event, and guess who he ran into? My wife's uncle, who helped me get the job. Told my boss Grandpa died 10 years ago. Boss, so you coming in or what? Me. F it, I quit. Boss and I reunited a few years later. We laughed our asses off of it. I apologized for lying. He apologized for working me like a dog. All good. So even though this is a crappy situation, it is nice to read of a circumstance where, time healing wounds, right? A few years have passed. You've let it go, you laugh about it now. There's no sense holding grudges. Story 23. Started clerking at a law firm after I graduated law school. The guy who hired me was a partner. Let's call him Greg. And he definitely didn't actually like me. But they needed me, and I didn't work with him directly, so it was sort of a non-issue. Everyone I worked with absolutely loved me. I was always called on to do extra tasks, which sucked in a way, but it was because they loved the work I did and knew I would always get crap done. Greg would give me small assignments here and there, never follow up on them, and then get annoyed when I would ask him about them. Like, hello, your client needs this crap done. But whatever, not my problem, I guess. There was always just this silent hostility, so I tried to avoid him as much as I could because, of course, it still makes for an uncomfy work environment. I was hired because of this one particularly large case. Like, we had 4 different attorneys all working on it exclusively. It was so much. And I honestly knew the most about it because all the attorneys were working on different parts, but would all turn to me to help them. The case was stayed in late November because of some complications, and Greg saw this as a great opportunity to get rid of me. Note that Greg wasn't even working on the case. He just didn't want me there? I don't know. So he comes up to me privately and tells me I have 2 weeks to wrap my crap up. I'm kinda shocked, but he's a partner, so I guess I do what he says. Eventually, I start talking to the attorneys on my case about what they need to know for when I leave, and all of them are like, "What the F are you talking about?" Lo and behold, Greg hadn't told anyone else about trying to fire me. Nah, he did that crap secretly, and was likely gonna say some crap about how unreliable I was when I just stopped showing up for work in 2 weeks. Well, the firm kind of imploded. Everyone, including other partners, were pissed at Greg, all begging me to stay. And for a few days, I considered it, but I kept thinking about how if I stay, I'm actively working to put money in the pockets of a guy who not only tried to fire me, but did it this underhanded way that was going to ruin my reputation, not only with this firm, but with others in the area if it got around that I just stopped showing up to work one day. Nah, F that. Told them I'm leaving the day before Thanksgiving. All the attorneys took me out for lunch that day. We got day drunk together, I got the rest of the day off, and tons of promises for glowing recommendations. F you, Greg. Story 24. First job out of the active duty military, I just up and quit without a set job in place of it. I will be the first to say that I definitely made the mistake of overloading myself between reserve duty, master degree classes at night, and working full time. But I also felt like the company told me a lot of misleading info just to get me to take the job because they were having a hard time filling it due to poor pay, bad hours, and a god-awful culture. When I interviewed with the company that I took a job with right after I left the military, they definitely pulled a bunch of BS switcheroos in terms of what I would be doing, the hours I worked, and benefits. It was a salary job, but I made it clear that to the GM and HR the obligations I had going to school at night and doing my reserve duty. A large part of taking the job was that they said they would pay for my new school. Now, I did not get this in writing, much to my chagrin. Life lesson right there, I will not make another mistake of. Because I was so happy to just have a job that would support reserve duty and going to school for my master's as well as help pay for it. So fast forward to the actual job. I was regularly working 12 to 14 hour days when I was not going to class Tuesday and Thursday nights from 6:25 to 10 p.m. I would leave early, and by early I mean I would get to work no later than 5:30 a.m., and then work until 4:30 p.m. when I would rush to get to class through extreme traffic because it was that bad at rush hour. When I did that, I would get complaints that I was not being a team player. The other days, I would usually work until 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. and get home close to 8 to 8:30 p.m. Weekends were usually just me recovering from the long days, catching up on schoolwork and studying, or doing my obligated reserve duty. I was told I would start having to work weekends as well. I remember the first time I had to drill on a Friday. I was given the worst amount of attitude about how much of my slack would need to be picked up because I wouldn't be there. There was another guy who was a reservist who was in the same type of position I was. He got fired not that many weeks after I started. Now, the leadership didn't say it, but I strongly suspect it was because of his reserve duty. The company wouldn't outright say they fired him because it's illegal to do so for that, but I strongly got the feeling. This sent me a strong message about the type of people I was dealing with. The reason the F this, I quit thing happened was because when I finally got a clear answer on my master's degree being paid for, after several months of asking, I learned from HR that it was a paltry sum. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. On top of the long hours, the culture of the place was so toxic with people at everyone's throats. The frontline workers calling out to just F things up, and senior management having zero clue how to hire and retain people. Hint, the company was run like a post-private equity buyout, for those of you who know what that means. After just several months, I was extremely exhausted, and was receiving harassment from the GM that I needed to be a team player. Basically, he was strongly hinting that I should quit school. Pushed me to say, F this, I quit. I actually didn't say that, but I quit by putting in my 2 weeks notice out of the blue, and they just sent me home. I also learned that thanks to my school hours and disability rating, I could apply to the VA VRE program and have my school paid for, and and get additional money to live off of while I went to school. When I did put in my notice, the GM gave me a long speech about how I would never find a job making what I was making for less hours and better benefits, how the company would be just fine without me, and how much of a mistake I was making. He got let go by his bosses a few months after I quit. When I was there, all he ever did was tell me story after story about how much loyalty was rewarded, and how the place we were at was going to be his legacy and he would die in the job, etc., etc. And guess that didn't happen for him. I guess the biggest thing I learned, and that everyone should realize, is that the interview process is just for a company to decide that you will get a chance to work for them. But it's a two-way street. Just because you accept a contract doesn't mean you're an indentured servant and stuck for life. Within the first 3 months, either the company or you will figure out that you're going to stick around. This is especially true for the younger generation. Every time a company sends out its senior members to go on and on about loyalty and sticking around and how to grow within the ranks, just remember it's a pretty quick effing LinkedIn search or Google search to figure out all these senior leaders have jumped around a ton. So if you want people to be loyal, then pay them an effing fair wage and treat them well. And don't act all shocked that people leave at the first chance they get, because from the top down, the company has created a culture that treats people like garbage. I know we like to say people quit their managers, but sometimes they quit because the whole system is one giant FU to human decency and mental well-being. Story 25. I've shared this before, but it's a great story about some coworkers that had enough of the crappy owner of the restaurant we worked at. It was a Japanese restaurant that had a really high turnaround rate. Like, they literally had help wanted sign taped to the entrance at all times because people quit all the time. The main reason why was because one of the owners was a huge female dog who loved to yell at people. I saw so many people come and go. Most usually lasted only a few days. There was a sushi chef there that had been there for a while, longer than I had been there. He was pretty cool and we got along great when we worked together. His girlfriend also worked there as a cashier, and a lot of times they were scheduled together. One Saturday that I was supposed to be off, I get a call from Carol, the female dog boss, asking me if I could come in. Apparently Max and his girlfriend had both just straight up quit and walked out of the restaurant. The place was pretty small, so usually it was just the cooks in the back, the sushi chef and the cashier/delivery driver. So when they left, they basically left the place empty aside from the cooks, who did not speak English that well. I decided to take the shift for the extra money, and when I got there, Carol was already there behind the sushi prep area making orders. She usually didn't come in at all on weekends, but would still watch the security cameras occasionally from her laptop at home, and if she saw you standing around doing nothing, she would call and yell at you. It turns out that was exactly what she did to Max and his girlfriend. She kept calling them a bunch of times and yelling at them about petty crap, and they finally had enough. Carol showed me the security footage of Max yelling at her over the phone, hanging up, then taking off his apron, and both him and his girlfriend flipping off the security camera and walking out. She was showing me because she couldn't believe how disrespectful they were and how they could just leave the restaurant like that when there were customers in it. Even though she was trying to play the victim, I knew damn well what she was like, and she just pushed them too far. Hell, I would have loved to do the same thing various times, but I desperately needed the job at the time. Last I heard of them was that they both got jobs at the sushi place that was competing with the restaurant they walked out on. Story 26. Ooh, I have a really good one. In 2018, I went to work for an ESL teaching company in China. The pay was crap, but I got a TEFL certificate out of it. I had planned on completing the contract year and hopping to another country. The hours were brutal, classes were poorly managed, and we had few adequate supplies, but I had no other job opportunities in the US. To say it was stressful was an understatement, but I got through it. I took on 2 other under-the-table tutoring gigs for food money. After 8 months of working like this in a polluted city, I got walking pneumonia, but I didn't realize that's what it was, because I didn't have access to an adequate hospital, and all my coworkers, also sick, just wound up on an IV drip for a day and were released to go back to work. I started refusing social outings and sleeping every chance I could in hopes that I would recover. I didn't. I woke up on a Saturday morning in January 2019 with a 102-degree fever and feeling like I got hit by a truck. I told my boss I wasn't coming in, and she was livid, and insisted I go to the hospital to get a doctor's note for proof. So I got up, walked to the closest clinic, waited 6 hours to see someone, and got cough syrup, buffering, and a 3-day leave of absence for my efforts. Spent the rest of Saturday, Sunday, and Monday in bed. On Tuesday, I returned to work to discover that my boss suspected me of having another day job, and she was also angry that I called off work, quote, at such a vital time. It was always a vital time at our center for her, because we were understaffed and she was disorganized. I dropped my tutoring clients. On Wednesday, my health began deteriorating rapidly. By the end of the day, I could barely speak, and I was coughing so hard I was gasping for air. I woke up at 3 a.m., painkillers and fever reducers no longer working, throat so rough I could hardly speak, and wheezing. I called my PCP based in the US. They told me that my health was deteriorating so fast that I had an estimated 24 hours to decide whether I was going to risk my life by staying and checking into a clinic, which were poorly funded, understaffed, and either gave too much or too little care, or coming back to the States. I whipped out my credit card, gathered what little remaining savings I had, and got the first flight out of the country. I packed my bag and tossed whatever didn't fit into 2 suitcases. It was a lot of stuff. I didn't care. I left my portion of rent and utilities with a housemate and let my landlord know what was up. Both were completely understanding. On the plane, my eyes started producing some nasty green discharge, so that was cool. I called my boss after clearing customs, telling her I wasn't going to be returning to work. Addendum. I checked in with my previous coworkers a couple weeks ago to check on them during the COVID outbreak. They told me that they were all fine and that my boss had been fired a couple months ago. I've been working odd jobs in the States since then, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to do, but at least I'm not sick. So last winter sucked, and Miss Rona had better stay the F away from me. Story 27. I was a store manager for a retail chain. I had a district manager that was a complete douchebag. He used conference calls as a platform for public humiliation and belittling. I had already told him 3 weeks prior that I wanted to step down, and he needed to find another manager. Well, after a particularly bad day with customers and doing merchandising in between helping customers and picking up the slack of the employees he wouldn't let me terminate, in walks Captain Douchebag, starts berating me and the store's appearance, never mind the fact I've been running record sales for the last 6 months straight, and asked me if he needed to get someone competent to run the store. I yelled at him, "I effing told you to get someone else 3 weeks ago, jackass!" Well, he stormed out and left. I went home that night not thinking too much more about it and went to bed. While I was asleep, I had a dream that I walked into the office where he was sitting, put a gun to the back of his head, and splattered his brains all over the computer. It felt so real. I woke up in a cold sweat, wondering how I was going to get away from the police. A few minutes later, I realized it was a dream and went back to sleep. I discussed it with my wife, and we both agreed I needed to quit. I went in the next day. I had scheduled myself to close. At the end of my shift, I left my keys and discount card on the desk and got another manager to lock the door behind me. Didn't call, didn't text, leave a note or anything. F that place. Yeah, if you're having dreams about literally murdering your boss, I think it's probably time to move out of that situation. Story 28. At my last web development job, I was working under probably one of the most disgusting excuses for a human being I've ever had the misfortune of sharing an industry with. We were working on a very important, complex project along with a junior developer who joined us earlier in the year. This manager was the senior developer, so he was mentoring this junior, quotes explained later, and was in charge of the general progression of the project. During the course of a project, he was making life hell. Rejecting code without so much as a glance at the changes, being a complete control freak, denying anyone any autonomy in their work, not sharing any of the planning with me or the junior on the team, so we never had any idea how much work was left to do, and trying to get me fired by removing my access to production servers and deliberately adding breaking changes during demos with the client. He decided at short notice in the last 2 weeks of December that year, short notice as in texted the boss at 2 a.m., that he was going on holiday and wouldn't be back until the new year. The boss comes in and tells me what's happening. I take over management of the project and start planning everything out on a whiteboard with the junior. The boss sends me and the junior a spec for the project, which the senior never shared with either of us. We realize how deep we're in the crap and we get cracking. Bust our asses to get feature after feature in place and working over the course of 2 weeks. More work got done in those 2 weeks than in the entire 9 months the project had been going. Come 2nd of January, we're all in the office and senior rocks up, late as usual, sits down and sees there's a metric F ton of work that's been done while he's gone. First thing he does, goes back through the history, finds the last change he recognizes, and resets the entire code base back to that point. 2 solid weeks of ass busting, gone. I went to the bathroom for a rage dump, started updating my resume on my phone, and replying to the mountain of emails from recruiters desperate to poach me. Context. Typically, each dev has their own copy of the project on their machine. They make changes, test, then open a pull request that allows their changes to be merged into the main code everyone else works off of. Story 29. Grew up in down east Maine. I was in high school working for a real Hardass. He had dug a giant hole out in his field for a pond. Because he failed to make the bank steep enough, he kept getting cattails. Every morning he would go out to feed the ducks. Well, after a couple years, the cattails got so thick he couldn't see the ducks. So it was one of the many crap jobs I had been assigned, to manage the cattails to an acceptable level. So one hot summer day, I had these long pants on and sneakers and was mowing the lawn and weed whacking. After a recent couple days of rain, the level in the pond was really high. I reached out with the weed whacker as far as I could, but only managed to get a couple of the cattails. After everything was done, I went back to the shop and said, "All done, what's next?" He said, "You're not done, I can still see the cattails." My sneakers and pants were soaked. I told him, "Nah, I can't reach them, I'm not getting them today." He said, "You can either finish what you were doing or go home." I said, "Eff it, I'll go home." Never went back to work for him. Looking back, he's taught me many valuable things in life. I've been back to drink beers and talk with the old man, and he's coming to my wedding in October. That's my story. Story 30. I worked at a Dairy Queen in high school. We were constantly understaffed. There were only ever 4 employees there. We were all teenagers, and the shift lead was the one in charge. There was me working in the front, 1 person working in drive-thru, 1 person making the food, and 1 person doing chores in the back. Trash, dishes, refilling freezers, etc. The register hadn't been replaced since the 1970s. All around, not an ideal work environment, but I was 16 and this was my first job, and I just needed to save up for college. I was new. I worked at this job for maybe a month. A lady wanted a New York cheesecake Royal Blizzard. It had strawberry filling. We were out. More came in the next day. I informed her that we could put something else in if she'd like. She said no problem. She'd like some peanut butter sauce. I brought out the Blizzard. She thanked me. 5 minutes later, the shift lead called me back by the grill and she's on the phone. The owner called. The lady, who's still in the lobby, somehow had the owner's number and called him and told him that I got her order wrong and that she's allergic to peanuts and I could have effing killed her. I explained the situation to the shift lead as quickly as I could because there was an angry line forming up front and the other 2 employees were mad that there was no one up there. She asked for the peanut butter since we were out of strawberries. I went up front and took a bunch of orders from more angry people that waited 60 seconds longer than they'd have liked to, and my shift lead kept getting calls again from the owner to get clarity on the situation. I think I broke my record for getting yelled at that night, both by my coworkers and customers. I finished my shift and cried in my car. I decided that night to look for a new job, and I did. Now look, by no means am I an expert on the subject, but this to me sounds a little bit like fraud. Like, how do you go in, specifically request a peanut butter pie or blizzard cake, whatever it was, and then call back conveniently 15 minutes later and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm deathly allergic to peanuts. I could have died." Yeah, sounds like a setup. OP, you did nothing wrong. Keep your head up. You're amazing. Story 31. I used to help an elderly couple. Grandpa was frail of health, and I do general nursing, bathing, feeding, and just keeping him company for the most part. Their daughter would come in and scream at the top of her lungs at them for the pettiest stuff. I was no maid. I'd help cleaning the kitchen in Grandpa's room, but it was not my obligation at all. Also, not part of the service my agency was offering. Anyway, one day, Karen, false name, comes in about a mess I had to clean. It was a bunch of bottles of wine she had that she dropped from a cabinet near her room while drunk. I wasn't even in the house, but Grandma told me what happened. She's, as usual, screaming, and I just couldn't take it. I felt really bad for Grandpa and Grandma, as we did grow into each other, but I refused to work with someone who can't treat me as a human being, so I left. I told the agency what happened and told them not to blacklist them, as the Grandpa does need help, but rather advise whoever might go that Karen is a massive C-word. Story 32. This was years ago, but I saw an ad on Craigslist asking for a restaurant manager, an assistant manager, and I had spent the last 5 years or so living out of state, managing an Italian restaurant, so at the very least I had experience. The first problem I ran into is that it didn't tell you what kind of restaurant it was. It didn't really tell you where it was. It gave an overall larger commercial area that spans 2 towns. I just kind of emailed and said, hey, I have experience and I'm interested. Weeks go by and I forget about it. I get a random email back after about 6 weeks asking if I was still interested. I went in for the interview and everything went well. They offered me the job and I said yes. Then, after I'm hired, they call me and say, hey, we don't want you to train here because you're going to be their boss and we don't want them to see your training. I thought that was weird, almost sounded scared of their own employees. So then they tell me that I'll be training in another state, roughly 50 minutes away. I had already put in notice with the other job and I was trying to see the good, so I agreed. So then, my first day of work, they take me aside and say, we're not going to make you the assistant manager right away. We're going to just give you the title of manager. So you're above a lead and you don't answer to anyone, but you're not the assistant manager. We want to ease the employees into this. There was that phrase again. Once again, they were trying to somehow take the long way into getting the employees to accept me, and I honestly didn't know what was going on. So I complete my 6 weeks of training and I'm ready to start at the original location. My first day of work, I show up and literally they told nobody I was coming. They didn't introduce me to anyone. People didn't even know they had hired a manager. And all of a sudden, I just showed up one day with a name tag that said manager. I then learned that the district manager and my store manager are best friends. And furthermore, the district manager is married to her sister. I then learned that one of the longest term managers there and her son work there and he's a manager as well. I then learned that 2 of the employees are cousins with those managers. So it seems everyone knew everyone, or rather everyone was seemingly related. They then proceeded to always schedule me with another manager. So I was never in charge since the other manager came in first and was the official closing manager, or I'd work during the day when the district GM was there ruining things. Things are pretty rough at first. The employees hired were pretty rough around the edges, most of them coming from one of the hardest parts of town, and their attitudes kind of reflected that. They were loud, they questioned authority, and one of them talked of punching a manager, and there was constant gossip. I kind of was drowning in misery most of the time, feeling like the odd guy out, and that everyone thought of me as a joke, and worst of all, I couldn't do anything about it. I had zero authority. The only bright spot was I was still making more than everyone else there, outside of my direct boss. So they were paying me really good money to essentially be a standing moron. As time went on, I started spending my workdays talking to this girl that worked there. I didn't really think much of it. We talked almost every day for a good 2 months before we agreed to hang out on Halloween. I remember sitting in her garage, pretty effed up on God knows how many beers. She lived with her parents, and her dad just kept feeding me beers, and since I thought he was pretty cool, we liked the same music, etc., I happily was drinking with them. All of a sudden, before I know it, everyone is gone, and it's just us 2. She confesses that she likes me, and I'm kind of blown away by it. So, long story less long, we start dating, and at first, nobody is none the wiser, even though she wasn't a manager. We started taking the same days off, and I think people finally figured it out. Rumors started to fly, and it made them upset that we stayed quiet about it. About 6 months go by, and I'm pulled into the office by my manager. She says the employees are uncomfortable about me dating this girl and that from now on we can't work any shifts together. I lose it, saying that the district manager and her are literally family. 2 of the managers are mother and son and live in the same house together. 2 regular employees are cousins with those 2 managers. And yet literally every one of those people can work together, and I asked her what the difference was. She stuttered and stammered and said she didn't know. She said she would contact the district GM with my concerns, and I said how long will it take to get back to me? Again, she didn't know. She left, and about an hour later, I pulled some food out of the oven, set my apron and key down in the office, and left. Story 33. I was hired to administrate a jail in a rural area. I ended up being fed a steady system of the local somebody's semi-literate, inbred relatives who needed jobs for employers. They'd last maybe a month or 2 before quitting, getting fired for being lazy, or performing illegal activities, or just flat out stop showing up to work with zero notice. I was routinely asked and ordered to perform actions which were illegal, unethical, or unsafe. I refused all these orders to an increasingly hostile sheriff and board of commissioners. Anyways, my contract specified a certain rate per hour and several benefits. None of these contractual obligations were being met, to include my pay rate, which routinely fluctuated wildly. After 3 years of that horse crap, the county commissioners began demanding that I go to a 6-month course of training only 2 weeks after my kid had been born, and I had been graciously granted a mere 3 days unpaid leave. I refused. They owed me over $6,000 in back pay and had not been honoring any of the benefits stipulated in the contract, like paid leave. Even my medical insurance had been declined when I tried to use it. They were somehow bewildered when I responded to their demands with a resignation letter and a notice of impending legal action to retrieve the wages which were being illegally withheld. I went on to become a patrol officer in a larger, more competently ran area's police department, while they closed their jail and disbanded their police force under a barrage of lawsuits. That was a few years ago. Last I heard from a buddy who still lives there, the very same local politicians were busy telling people that COVID-19 is less dangerous than the flu, and to disregard the quote, media panic over nothing. Let's see how well that works out for them. Story 34. I worked on an oyster farm in southern Maryland. I had 2 managers, a dock manager and a farm manager. The latter was a middle-aged man with kids. He was very kind and sympathetic to my position. The former was a woman about my age who was very aggressive and rude and clearly power-tripping in her managerial capacity. I had just graduated from Johns Hopkins and was living with my then-girlfriend, who still had a year to go in school. The relationship was souring on account of the psychological distress I was experiencing from life being put practically on hold. I had been rejected from graduate programs the previous spring, and since I was 15, I had wanted to go into academia in my subject. In the span of 1 day at the farm, I was electrocuted by the mechanical tumbler on the dock, stabbed in the wrist by a rusty hunk of metal from one of the oyster cages, almost pulled under water when the boom arm on the boat snapped and the rope supporting the cage wrapped around my hand, and nearly crushed by a 700-pound crate when the line went slack after the boom motor died. The crate landed on my foot, but I was wearing steel-toed boots which are now dented. I put in my 2 weeks because I have some amount of dignity and weathered the verbal abuse from the dock manager. The farm manager was very understanding. After quitting, I broke up with my girlfriend on account of her gaslighting me, then moved back in with my parents. Directly after doing so, I got a job as an environmental educator, which was absolutely the best thing that could have happened to me at that point. And I also made the decision to reapply to grad programs. I got into Oxford, which is where I'm studying now. Story 35. Working Roy Rogers in my senior year, a bazillion years ago. I would come straight from school and work 3:30 to close, which was typically 11 or 12 every day, and Saturday I had to come in early to unload the truck. I worked solo in the back. My job was chopping all the fixins for the fixin' bar, make biscuits from scratch, eggs, flour, buttermilk, grease the pans, make the chicken, double bread and double fry, clean all the dishes, and keep the front of the house clean. It was insane, but it kept me from having to deal with the customers, the worst part of any fast food job. The day manager I never got along with. We'll call her Monica because F her, that was her name. So Monica wanted to be the buddy boss and not run things, so she would let 3/4 of the day crew go home by noon. I get there at 3:30 and we're out of everything, every day. Even if the back person left me stuff pre-made but in the fridge, it was all 3+ hours old and had to get dumped. So after about 2 weeks of this BS, I finally had enough and went to my manager, the head manager. He looks and sees we have no chicken, no biscuits, full sinks of dirty dishes, and I'm elbow deep in flour doing biscuits and chicken at the same time. I told him Monica told me to throw out all the stuff in the fridge because it's too old. To be fair, it wasn't sitting out in the heat. It's all been cling wrapped in the walk-in. He said, F her, if she didn't let everyone go home, we wouldn't be out of everything 20 minutes before the dinner rush starts. Just cook the biscuits from the fridge. Monica comes back with a new hire and is taking him downstairs to watch the slideshow, and she sees me putting the old biscuits in the ovens. What are you doing? I told you to make new. Mike said to use what we had because you let everyone go. She storms off and does the training. About 45 minutes later, she comes back up, and I'm still busting my ass, and she grabs me by my arm and says, "Don't ever go over my head again, and don't disrespect me in front of new hires." I looked at her and said, "Do you need my 2 weeks notice in writing, or is verbal enough?" Her dick holster hit the floor and she walked off. Mike came back and said, "You serious?" "Yeah, Mike, I told you last week I was going to quit because of my finals and all the reports I need to do at the end of the year." He said, "That's right, I forgot. Can you put it in writing though?" "Yeah, sure, no problem." That female dog called me every day for 2 weeks trying to get me to change my mind. The real kicker is she got moved to Saturdays and I quit on a Friday, so after 2 weeks, she called me Saturday morning asking when I was coming in. I laughed, hung up, and rolled over. Story 36. Recently working as a cashier at a supermarket. Honestly, people can be bad, but Corona has just brought out the worst in everyone. People getting way too close, people getting mad and yelling at me because they're not allowed to buy 40 rolls of toilet paper, or because we've run out of a certain product. The amount of abuse I've received multiplied by 10 after the outbreak. What the F am I supposed to do? I can't change company policy for you. I can't magic more toilet paper and noodles into existence. I'm a 20-something working for not a lot of money. I have no power. It got to a point that one woman was literally screaming at me to let her buy 15 packets of pasta, max 2 per item, calling me a effing idiot and saying that I'm just a low-level cashier, so I don't get to decide the rules. I ended up standing up and yelling back, "You're right, you effing female dog. I don't get to decide the rules, so stop yelling at me to change them." Manager came over and told me off while sucking the old woman's chicken and apologizing for my behavior. So I said F this and quit on the spot. Story 37. Worked as a delivery driver at a sandwich chain that had a super crappy 18-year-old manager. We had 2 older managers, but they promoted this kid that had just graduated from high school who had a huge power trip over people older than him. I was early 20s. The first problem was that he changed the time my shift started that day, and I was due in an hour earlier than the schedule had said on the previous night when I left. I think I'm supposed to be in at 5, but it was 4 now, so he calls me at 4:03 to ask where I am. I tell him I'll be in at 5, like scheduled, to which he said I'm due in at 4. Well, I lived a half a mile away, so it's not a huge deal, and I walk in at 4:11, and he has a written warning waiting for me for being over 10 minutes late. He had obviously already planned this because it was completely filled out by the time I walked in. It's a summer job, so I sign it. Whatever. Next shift that he leads, we're getting slammed, and I'm out on deliveries constantly, just running in to grab another and leave. The managers were in charge of slicing the meat, but the drivers were supposed to do dishes, and the slicer is dirty, so he tells me to wash the slicer as I'm running out orders. I tell him I will when there aren't orders to take. I end up taking like 10 in a row while he and the other 2 teen F-faces chat in the back, and he gets on to me that he has all the meat to slice, but he can't. I tell him he should wash it since I'm effing busy. I tell myself that if the slicer is not cleaned by the time I get back, that I would put in my notice. It wasn't cleaned, and I put in my notice to him, and he looked so happy. The next day was the best day of work I've ever had, though. This kid thought he knew it all and would save some money on a Sunday morning shift. Other managers set out how much bread needs to be made for the following shift. He only made half of the recommendation and would save the other half for later. Well, we got slammed harder than I've ever seen in the shop. Lines out the door, and we run out of bread and won't have more for at least an hour as he's proofing the crap he was supposed to make hours before. Then he jumps on the register to tell people we can only serve this food in a lettuce wrap. People are pissed. The best part? We were scheduled to be audited by corporate that month, but wouldn't know when. The minute we were out of bread, corporate walks in and freaks the F out, calling other stores for bread, yelling at him for disobeying the GM. Glorious, glorious. He was fired, and I still left in 2 weeks because they were going to promote another teen F-face. So, no offense to 18-year-olds out there, teenagers in general. You're delightful, young adults, but you are not ready to be a manager at a place like this. You're just not. You got to live a little bit more, get a little bit more experience. I'm sure this young man will mature, and 10 years from now, he will be an incredible manager. I just know it. Story 38. Female penetration tester working with immature boys that harassed me so much I quit, sued, and won. I'm a female penetration tester, a white hat hacker as we're called, on an all-male team. I'm pretty fit and attractive too, so you can draw a number of conclusions already. As a woman in the technology field, I've often found myself the only woman, or among a handful at best. The penetration puns were expected, and the guys never got how effing immature it was. Anyway, I knew it came with the territory. The harassment wasn't usually threatening, just stupid and childish, so I brushed it off usually. I'm damn good at my job, so that was always helpful. The social engineering part was always a breeze to me, so I was always on the team for that phase of our engagements. You know, gaining access where I shouldn't have been allowed, then plugging in a rogue access point, rubber ducky, land turtle, or stealing a couple laptops. My final engagement with this company was a complete risk assessment for a large publicly traded manufacturing company. I easily gained access to secure areas of their headquarters office and accomplished my mission with the rogue access point, 2 strategically placed USB keyloggers, and had enough time to run several processes on a key system, then got out of there. So our network expert, I'll call him Jeff, had all the setup he could ask for and started accessing the network based on my work. He was doing fine, but then just dropped off. No big deal, really. That crap happens. So he tried to reestablish his links, but kept failing. Jeff tells me I need to go back in, but there was no way I was trying that. It's his problem if he can't stay connected. He appeals to the team lead, and I hear him talking about the outfit I wore in my first attempt. Nothing scandalous, mind you, but cute and meant to give the appearance of an approachable yet professional tech girl. I hear the team lead asking questions about my outfit and blushed at the rest of their conversation. Next, the lead tells me I have to go back into the target office, but I can't look the same. His suggestions of my appearance were clearly given of his sexual fantasy based on photos he was suggesting I wear. End of the story is I quit on the spot and sued the company, who settled for 3 years' salary. F that company and their a-hole team. Story 39. Was working as a dishwasher a few years back at a restaurant. It was a super busy night, and the waitresses/waiters are supposed to rinse certain dishes due to baked cheeses and whatnot. Well, on this super busy night, they were not doing any soaking of anything. I understood it was busy, but it takes literally seconds for them to drop a little dish into a bucket of solution for it to soak. It got to a point where I politely asked the waiters/waitresses to please soak the dishes because it was making my job much more difficult. Well, the big boss overheard me ask them and replied with, "What did you just say to them?" I replied with, "I was just asking them to soak their dishes, you know, their job." And he replied with, and I quote, "You're just a dishwasher, you don't get to talk to them." Now, I'm the type of guy to tell you to go F yourself if you disrespect me like that, regardless of if you're my boss or not. So we got into a heated argument over it. Couple hours pass, and it comes to my smoke break. My boss stops me on my way out and says, "You don't get a smoke today since you think you can talk to me like that." So me, being kind of a punk at the time, walked up to him, got in his face, and told him he's lucky there's too many people in the kitchen or I'd knock you out right here. Grabbed my stuff and walked out afterwards. F that guy. I've grown up since and realized threatening people with violence should be a last resort, and I could have handled it differently. I just know points seem to get across a lot better when someone gets punched is all. Story 40. I used to be a hospital security guard in a rough part of a major city in California in the biggest Kaiser hospital with the biggest trauma unit in the city. Almost all the gang shooting victims would get sent to our hospital, as well as all the crazy schizophrenic homeless people and violent drug addicts. Our job as security were to watch 5150 patients, some of them were violent, or deal with crowd control if there were visitor limits for certain patients. Cops were not always there to help if real bad crap went down. Imagine trying to prevent gang members from visiting their friend who got shot, or try dealing with a violent psychopath in the ER who was trying to fight staff members. I was there for 5 years. Luckily, I used to be posted in the more calm parts of the hospital, usually, and I was only called down to the ER to assist other guards once in a while. Well, eventually they cut all the guard posts except for the ER and more volatile areas. I was forced to work in the ER all the time during my last year, and it was almost non-stop chaos. I had to throw people to the ground just about every week and had people yelling in my face every day due to visitor limits. It got so nightmarishly stressful, I ended up quitting with no job lined up. Eventually, I was lucky enough to get another job that was much less life-threatening. So, OP didn't specify here, but I live in California near a Kaiser, and I'm pretty sure it's the same Kaiser that OP's talking about. And let me just confirm on record, it is just as rough as advertised here in this post. It's bad. It's bad down there. Story 41. I worked for a sociopath for 2 years. We were a dog training facility / daycare. This woman was Brazilian, had no idea about anything relating to dogs, almost killed one of our pets by leaving him in her car for 3 hours in the summer, killed a cat by grooming it, treated us all like crap, took 6 or 7 Hawaiian vacations a year, paid us like crap, and then complained she worked too hard and didn't get paid enough. And once we found an unauthorized shock collar on a dog she boarded at her house. She forgot to take it off him. We threw it in the trash and then lied about knowing where it was. Once she complained to us that her doctor told her to stop eating so much steak. She has steak every meal and it's bad for her. Also, the wooden joists of our facility were collapsing from termite damage. Once they spawned and came up through the tiles in the floor. The roof leaked, water damage was rotting the floors out, everything we used was old or broken. This place was a crap hole. And that's the tip of the iceberg. Her husband kicked a few of our dogs and was fired by his wife. He showed up usually when the very, very young, cute girls were alone and he would hit on them. Both husband and wife were constantly coked up and stoned, even when driving. So this female dog. After a disastrous few months, my boss and best friend Kay got a call from the owner, the woman in question, Liana. And yeah, I'll use her real name. Last name too, if I won't get banned. The owner had just come back from a week in Hawaii and was complaining about all the work she had to do, to us and our customers. Then, apropos of nothing, Liana brings up Kay's nemesis, C, one of the girls that works at our other facility. That's another novel-sized story. Kay hates C so goddamn mother-effing much that even bringing up her name will cause Kay to rant about that crack-smoking, thieving whore for 20 minutes. And Liana's now telling Kay that C is a better employee, because C kisses Liana's ass and C sucks crap at this job. So Kay hangs up on her, then throws the phone against the wall and smashes it to bits. 45 minutes pass. Liana has driven from her home 45 minutes away and shown up angry. She and Kay go into the office and Kay storms out of the front door swearing up a storm. God, I love her. My best friend and boss is fired for hanging up on the owner. So now I'm done with this place. I'm not suffering this bullcrap by myself. 2 months later, I'm totally checked out, doing nothing, caring less. I mentioned to another employee that I'm looking for other work. Keep in mind, the owner is not present when I say that, and the employee would have no contact with Liana, and they're a trusted friend. Liana's there the next day, tells me if I was going to find another job, she was going to give all my hours to somebody else. I'm mad and confused, so I call the labor department to find out if that's legal. It is. I mentioned to another employee, I called the labor department. Next day, I come back from break and Liana and another employee are in the dog room. Unusual. She says, "You don't need to worry about calling the labor department anymore." See, unbeknownst to us, she was listening to all our conversations over the security cameras. So here's where I had to make a choice. I could A, do the right thing and walk out. It's adult and professional. Or I could go punk rock and tell this C word where to shove it. So I calmly walked out. Kidding. I thought, well, I'm not going to get the chance again. And then I unleashed a screaming verbal tirade right in her effing face, the likes of which you cannot imagine. Slightly paraphrased. You insane dog-killing, effing Brazilian female dog, who do you think you are? You treat us like crap and think we're just gonna take it? Suck a chicken. You pay us like crap and then complain about your vacations to us? I can barely pay my effing rent and you're bickering about how much steak you eat? You stupid effing C-word. I swear to Christ, do you ever wonder why everyone who leaves here hates you? Because they don't care about the job? F you. We sat here and dealt with you and your coked up sex predator husband for years, and we said nothing. I don't care? I'm yelling because I do care. You're a effing sociopath, you dumb female dog. F this. I'm done. And just before I slammed the door in her face, I made sure to get the one last shot in. Oh, and by the way, remember the shot collar you put on Sparty? We threw it away and lied to your effing face about it. Bye, female dog. Slam. Slept like a baby that night. Edit. And this is Sparty, by the way. He's a very sweet and good boy who absolutely effing did not deserve to be tortured by that effing disgusting wench. Story 42. The summer before freshman year of college, I was a busboy at a relative upscale restaurant, well known for its huge and well-heeled lunch crowd. As I was rushing around removing used plates from tables, a businessman grabbed me by the sleeve, shoved an empty bread basket at me, and just said, "Refill this." Okay, sure. It was towards the end of the lunch rush and was told there were no more rolls. I returned to the table, and after telling the guy that, he threw a hissy fit, a effing full-blown temper tantrum because there were no more rolls. He sent me back into the kitchen with, "There's got to be more back there somewhere. Don't come back unless you have some." Okie dokie, you got it, a-hole. After a cursory look to make sure I hadn't overlooked any, I went to the garbage and took out 4 to 5 partially eaten rolls, put them in the basket, covered them with a cloth napkin, and took them to the table. I watched him open the napkin and stare open-mouthed at the roll remains. He wasn't happy and started yelling loud enough to attract the manager. Before the guy could say anything, I took off my uniform jacket they provided, handed it to him, and said, "I quit. Not one regret. Ever." Story 43. Got a job at Hobby Lobby when I was younger. Spent hours my first day assembling a new shelf layout using the photos given to me for each aisle's layout. The district manager walks in and starts yelling at me and cursing in front of about 20 people, all employees since this was a brand new building that was being assembled. Apparently, the metal bracket that holds the glass separators in place has a lip on the end. This lip doesn't affect how the glass is held, it just holds the bracket in place. Well, the district manager wants them to make L shapes and not backward L shapes when inserted. Again, doesn't affect performance, just an aesthetic choice. I said, "Ma'am, I'm installing these as I was shown and have done 3 aisles this way in the last couple of hours." Well, she was mad at me for talking back to her now. Mind you, this was my first day. She walked me back to the manager's office and told him what I did. He said he would come see and assign someone else to fix the shelves. Sat me in his office for that time. District manager pulls the lady who trained me how to install the brackets back into the office and choose her a new one. I speak up and apologize to the trainer. She was just a veteran employee. She showed me what to do in about 30 seconds and checked on me every half hour, and she said I was doing well, so I continued. I apologized for getting her in trouble, then stood up and asked if I could leave. I've never been treated that way. The manager was a family friend, and I couldn't do anything in front of him, so I just said, "Wow, I thought Hobby Lobby was a Christian organization, and you spent 20 minutes cussing people out over brackets that are set up properly, but the small lip on one end that no one will see points left instead of right." I started laughing and shaking my head and just walked out. Got a job with the Boy Scouts of America the next week, making considerably more and chilling at a desk all day making phone calls. That was the best job I ever had, but the pay was awful. People were amazing there. So just going based off those last couple sentences, Hobby Lobby must just really be railroading their employees. If OP moves to the Boy Scouts of America making, quote, considerably more than Hobby Lobby, but then the next sentence says that the pay is awful. So it's like, what was Hobby Lobby paying you? That's kind of wacky. Story 44. Mine was a little different. I was working for a large Fortune 500 company. The first organization I worked for was bought by this giant. I originally got laid off, then hired back under a new role, with my original start date from the old company. Towards the end, I was nearing 10 years. Stress had built over time, and I had seen the writing on the wall, so I was dishing out my resume. I found the perfect role for me and lined up an interview through an old work friend. I set up the interview with the GM at the new place. Not even an hour later, I received a call from my boss, their boss, and HR all on the phone. They were eliminating my position, but wanted to keep me on and pay me slightly more. My responsibilities would be the same, but I would report to a new boss. The other option was a layoff. Given light of the circumstances, I asked for 24 hours to think about it, which they obliged. Immediately, I rang my friend at the new gig and filled him in on the situation. I asked if he thought I would land the role. He basically said, "It's yours, just go through the process. You know your crap." The following day, I called HR and told them I was going to take the layoff. I heard later through the grapevine that not a single one of my higher-ups thought I would cut and run. Apparently, it shook the foundation a little bit. Know your value, people. My bosses never even followed up with me for an exit interview or similar, just radio silence. The package gave me 9 weeks of severance. I went through the process with the new company and landed the job. I started 5 weeks after my layoff and was raking in 2 checks for a solid month. I was also making far more than the slight pay bump the Fortune 500 organization offered. Honestly, everything just fell right into place. Sometimes the stars just align, you know? Story 45. I'm working at a call center with Spanish for about 2 years, and last summer summer, my manager told me that she was proud of my work and she wanted to promote me by putting me in a new project. My new position became a nightmare. I had a new manager who gave me the manual, full of different cases and new materials, and for 2 weeks, with barely 2 sentences of explanation, I had to start doing the job on my own. I sent wrong mails, messed up a lot of cases, and was treated awful by the manager. When I had a question about my work, because I was still new, he gave me wrong answers, and they reduced the reception of my work. At the end, I even lost my bonus. I thought that with time, I will learn what to do. Nope. With the time, he got even worse. He told me that I'm stupid, I can't remember crap, and he was so angry that he started tapping the keyboard of my computer furiously. I wanted to leave my work because I didn't have the nerves. I was stressed out, but then the quarantine broke out, and judging the situation, if I leave my work now, then where am I going to find a new job? Especially during the crisis, and even though the whole world is scared and people are asking others to stay home, I'm working from that same office. Today we got the news that we'll start working from home finally. But even today, he was a-hole-ish and dashed out when he saw me. Worst of all, when I got the opportunity to speak with HR, they protected him by saying that he has too much on his shoulders. Story 46. I delivered pizza for Papa John's. I was already nearing the end of my rope with this job since the managers/owners were sexist, racist scumbags. Once while I was doing prep work, the owner told me I should look into being topless house cleaner because they make a lot of money. Oftentimes, I overheard other male employees rating women employees who worked at the business on a hotness scale or commenting on their breasts and appearances. The owners repeatedly used the N-word. While several employees were African American, he just never used the word around them. The owner also made fun of immigrants' first and last names constantly. One day in the winter during a massive blizzard, we were totally behind on deliveries since we always got bombed whenever it snowed. Orders were arriving late and cold, and most of the customers all day were upset and annoyed rather than understanding. I was one of the only 2 drivers working that day, so I had to take 3, 4, or 5 deliveries with me at a time. I climbed through snowbanks and unshoveled sidewalks, then up 3 flights of stairs to deliver 2 pizzas to this elderly woman who was quilting with her elderly friends in a community building. The order total was $24. She handed me a coupon she had for a free pizza and told me she spoke to the manager and said it was fine and she only paid $10 because she had a coupon. I'd never seen the coupon before and wanted to confirm with the manager this was okay, but I had left my phone charging in my car 3 flights of stairs down. Also, I had 3 other deliveries getting cold and didn't really have the time to mess around over a coupon, so I just took the coupon and figured I could sort it out later with the manager. When I was finally getting checked out for the night, I was $14 short because of the coupon. I explained to the manager I made the decision to accept the coupon because of the circumstances, and he told me that the woman never told him about the coupon, nor did he approve her using it. He then informed me that I was going to pay the difference. I said, if you make me pay $14 out of my own money for that woman's pizza after risking my life all day to deliver a pizza in this blizzard for this company, I'm walking out right now and I'm not coming back. He said, that's fine. I filled for unemployment, citing all the sexual harassment and racism I witnessed and experienced, but since I had only worked there 3 months, I didn't qualify for unemployment. Story 47. Worked at a small mom-and-pop store selling antiques, silly knickknacks, and furniture. The owner did all the supplying and rarely came in. Had hired a CEO to manage things, plus a manager and a shift leader. This was like a 3-to-1 ratio of bosses to regular associates. They were never on the same page, and I constantly had different expectations. Don't do any tasks except talk to people. Clean the store if you're not busy. One time, I noticed that we ran out of a dress that was selling well, and we had more in the back. I brought out the missing sizes and started steaming them near the front of the store where we were slow, so that I could put them out on the rack. I got in trouble because I should have been doing nothing. Another time I got in trouble for rearranging a few things. The next day, someone had bought the item I moved, after it had sat for weeks being unnoticed. It was my first sales job, so I needed some direction and help on how to best interact with people. I was clear about these needs. I had no resources, and when I asked for information, like facts about the furniture, she told me, I'll get back to you. One day, the owner was there and a bunch of people came in at once. "Where's your salesperson?" The manager gestured to where I was, and I heard the owner say, "No, where's your real salesperson?" Instead of helping or saying anything to me, the manager called another employee in. I just walked out. Got a job 4 days later at a company I love with a leader who has clear expectations, listens to my struggles, and offers real solutions. Not everyone has the ability to change jobs, but I hope everyone can find one that treats them well. Story 48. Man, there's so many. Worked at a small Middle Eastern restaurant where I was the only FOH staff during the day shift. Things were usually pretty good. The owners had a smoking hot son who I got on well enough with to date outside the restaurant. I'd been working there for almost a year and started to notice my purse/personal belongings were being moved. I brush it off as maybe someone is just shifting them to grab extra napkins or whatever that was housed beneath the register. Then one day I catch the owner going through my bag. I took out the trash and I guess he expected it to take longer. Quit on the spot and gave him a tongue lashing. Another time, I'm working for a medium-sized furniture manufacturer and we're at a trade show in Chicago. It's just me and my boss/owner. This is her first trade show in 30 years that her husband/co-owner didn't attend, and she's sticking to me like glue. Wants to spend every minute with me in and out of the show. By the end of the week-long ordeal, I was about ready to strangle her when she demands I meet her in the lobby the next morning at 4 a.m. to go to the airport for our 10 a.m. flight. I don't know who needs a 6-hour lead time at the airport, so I tell her no. I'm not waking up and going to the airport 6 hours ahead of time. She keeps insisting. We part and go to our separate rooms where she proceeds to text me confirming that we're meeting at 4 a.m. in the lobby. My passive-aggressive self immediately logs into my flight and change my return trip to the afternoon. Pay the little $75 to do it and then turn off my phone. I knew she would get the change notice because the flights were purchased by her. That was my I quit moment. I took my sweet time the next day hitting some tourist spots and taking pics. I made it to the airport with maybe 45 minutes till my flight departs. Breezed through security and still have time for a pre-flight drink. We needed 6 hours my ass. Didn't talk to her or check my messages the entire weekend. Go into work that following Monday to grab my stuff and do the final farewell, and instead, she apologized for being overbearing and essentially momming me to death. I still work with this company today. Story 49. Third year at university. It was my first day as an intern. The company was recommended to me by a lecturer, so I was pretty sure the company and the owner is cool. I asked the owner about the salary, and he told me that they're going to pay for my dinner, and that's all. And he added that he only paid to one intern in his life, and that intern was too poor. He felt bad and gave him money. I decided that guy's a jerk, but it's okay. It's only a 40-day internship. And that day, his sister, she was also working with us, kept talking about how wealthy they are. It's graceless, but still okay. I can stand for 40 days. The second day, I lost my wallet on my way to work and couldn't find it. I had to tell him about it because I was nearly 10 minutes late because of that. So he knew my situation. When the dinner time came, I didn't get my dinner card yet. I was all hungry with no money or cards. His sister asked me if I'm going to go eat with them, and I told them I lost my wallet. One more time, so I don't have money. She said that so they're leaving, and they left, leaving me in the office hungry. I still feel upset when I remember that day. It was only my second day with my dream job, and they crashed it so hard. End of the working day, I left the office and blocked all of their numbers. Never turned back again without saying anything. I was so hungry. Eating the rich would be so much better, LOL. Story 50. I was a seasonal worker at JCPenney. I was a stocker. One day, the store manager asked me after our morning huddle if I would go up to the stockroom, second floor, and organize the racks. I said sure, and went to grab a walkie-talkie, and she said not to worry about that. Just stay up there and do that and take breaks as needed. So off I went to organize. I put some music on my phone and organized the crap out of those racks. You couldn't even walk up there before, and now there were rows and the different rack types organized in their own space. It took me about 5 hours, and I never took a break. After I was done, I grabbed some chips and a drink and went to the break room. One of the sectional managers walked in and said, "Oh crap, bro, you're in trouble." I asked her why, and she said that the store manager had been looking for me for hours. So I ran back to the stockroom as her and the HR manager were coming out. She was red in the face and asked me where I had been and why I didn't have a walkie. They had been calling me for like 2 hours. I told her I did exactly what she told me to do, and it was done, so I took a 5-minute break, and that she told me this morning I didn't need one today. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I never told you to do that." She took me in her office and explained that people wanted hours, but she was giving them to me, and that if I can't do my job, then someone else will. So I told her, good luck finding them. I quit. She tried to get me to stay, but I was over it. The store closed 6 months later after almost the entire staff quit because of her. Story 51. I was the top waiter at an Olive Garden back in the day. 20-table section because people called in sick? Give it to me. I'll handle it. Finicky customer who can't be happy? Give it to me. I'll make them happy. Someone needs a day off? I'll take it. Need someone to open and close same day? Ha, I've got this. One day, some Jewish holidays are coming up. I tell my boss that I need the days off. She says no because I can't give them 3 weeks' notice. I say that there are laws against refusing to give people time off for religious holidays. She says, too bad, sue me. I tell her I'm not coming in and she has 3 weeks to figure it out. She says that if I don't come in, I'm fired. I started laughing. I was the most experienced waiter on staff who had stepped in for absolutely everything that was ever asked for. I was the guy keeping labor costs down by covering 2 or 3 sections in a shift. I told her I'm not coming in, and if she wants to fire me, have a good time. Cut to 3 weeks later. I don't come in. I'm getting ready to go to my parents' synagogue for services when my phone rings. Why aren't I there? I remind her of our conversation 3 weeks earlier. She says that if I'm not there in half an hour, I'm fired. So I told her to F herself and hang up. I was never officially fired. I just never went back. Less than a week later, I had my next job lined up. A month later, that Olive Garden shut down. A few weeks later, someone came into the new restaurant I was working at and recognized me. They asked to be in my section. Then they told me that the place fell apart after I left. The other waiters sucked, management didn't care, they aren't going back and were happy to find me. A few months after that, the Olive Garden was boarded up in the middle of the night. Story 52. I was hired to manage a team of designers as a creative director at an ad agency back in the mid-'80s. The people that were there already were hired to replace the art department that walked out en masse. Red flag there. None of them had any working experience, so I was hired to manage them, write copy, organize the debt and workflow, figure out production budgets, etc. Big job, but I was happy to get it. I'd been underemployed for about 4 months. Things were doing okay for a while, but then the owner got crazy. Drinking at lunch, drinking in the office, etc. I came up with an ad campaign that the client loved and supposedly the boss loved. We shot the expensive photos, he had the films done, had all the work completed and ready to be signed off and go into the magazines via FedEx that Friday evening around 6 p.m. Key. All I needed was the boss's sign-off. I brought the previously approved, by him and the client, ads into his office and he throws a fit. Says they're terrible and that I need to redo them entirely. I told them the deadline is that next Monday at all 5 of the magazines and that it would be impossible to get client approval on the ads and have new shots made and the films completed by that time. Too bad, you better figure out how to do it or you're fired. I went back to my desk, stood there for about a minute trying to figure out how insane he was, but then gathered up my stuff and walked to the back door. I shouted towards his office, "I quit! Bye!" and then left. I landed a good design job about 3 weeks later, so F that guy. His firm ended up going under about 2 years later. His reputation preceded him and nobody would work there. Story 53. Was the assistant to one of our in-home sales guys. My job involved scheduling appointments, doing the administrative stuff around his sales, and making sure the product he sold was gathered together for the delivery guy to take out to the job site. Typically, I would get everything gathered together 2 days in advance of the delivery, so I would know if a substitution needed to be made. I came in one morning and someone had rearranged the delivery schedule and not told me, so the delivery guy was pissed that the materials he was supposed to deliver that morning weren't ready to go. He laid into me, called me all sorts of names, just going on and on about how I was worthless, and he didn't know how I got my job, etc. Bear in mind, this was the only time I did not have a delivery ready to go for this prima donna. His tirade went on long enough that I remember just zoning out after a while, and I got really numb thinking to myself, this is is utter bullcrap, and I don't deserve to be talked to like this. I just walked away from him, grabbed my purse, and headed to the GM's office. I walked into her office, shut the door behind me, and said, I quit. I can't do this anymore, and detailed exactly what had happened. By this point, the numbness had worn off, and I had started to shake and cry because I was so angry. She listened, gave me a hug, and said, why don't you take a couple days off and I'll see what I can do. I took 3 days off, came back, she offered me a job in a different department where my interactions with deliveries were minimal, and the delivery guy was nice as pie to me until he left the company. Story 54. I worked at a plasma donation job as a phlebotomist for 2 years that constantly told us that we should be grateful to work for them because they pay better than other places. It was a decent pay, but anyone with a brain knows a hospital would be so much better to work in and get paid much better. They always constantly made us feel like we were never enough, and they allowed an employee who'd been there for years to spread rumors. Sometimes it got so bad that workers formed cliques and would talk crap about other employees in front of patients. I got a great job offer after busting my ass for a new license to work as a medical biller and coder. The place was closer to my home, offered amazing benefits, and had a very positive atmosphere. I gave my 2 weeks, and my bosses were surprised that I'd be the one leaving. Everyone else who's either quit or stayed often had no choice or were in bad shape with the boss. But I was just an average employee, and from what my friends and family told me, I'd look like a complete pushover despite having very strong opinions and strict followings of rules. I tried my best to keep it to myself that I was leaving, but on a really busy Friday night, we were swamped and I was the only veteran phleb aside from one who was forced to stay, although he was the morning shift. So he and I, with a bunch of newbies, were suddenly stuck with a rush of donors. The night manager messed up the schedule again, and has been for so long despite many of us saying to just pass it to our lead to set things up. The night manager of the floor wanted to always make sure I never did the fixing when someone messed up, despite all the other veteran phlebs saying I have things handled and can do the job just fine, even have recommended me to become a trainer. She would refuse and say I lacked confidence, yet she always chips away employees' confidence by badmouthing them. She always does this to certain phlebs that apparently she just personally didn't like. However, most of the veteran phlebs hated her. We were mad her cousin had to be switched out of the company because they both can't be there, and the bosses made a bad call and took her cousin out and kept her there. Her cousin, despite being our best phlebotomist with 10 years of experience, was also the best trainer, and anyone she trained would become immediately dependable. The night manager, however, was the opposite. She was spiteful and quick to get mad that you couldn't get something in less than a second. Many of us resented her for it, since she never had an issue throwing her power around and belittling others in front of people. A situation happened where someone with thin veins was having trouble donating. Everyone else was busy fixing their own errors or taking down patients that were finished. So I stepped in. I tried my best, did the routine procedure, but unfortunately her veins were just too thin even on the other arm. So I made the call to return her blood back, give her some electrolytes, and told her to take it easy for a few weeks. I made sure the girl didn't have to lose blood, but it was clear she couldn't continue. The loss, however, for the company doesn't always see it that way. When word got back to her of what happened, because it had to be reported, always, even if it's a success, she comes up to me and belittles in front of everyone, saying I should have let someone else do it if I couldn't fix it. I told her that the only other person who could do it was busy fixing another patient, and we were both working simultaneously. She still went on, saying I don't have the skills compared to another phlebotomist, and told me to just call only him. The poor guy was so overlooked, since he wasn't even supposed to be in the afternoon shift. He was a morning shift that was forced to stay longer because she was the one who messed up the schedule. I had enough. I finished my work, made sure to clean everything down since I was always the last to leave. I volunteer anyway since no one ever wanted to restock the supplies either. I saw another on-call manager, she works the front with the other nurses, and told her what happened. That I had enough and refused to be talked to that way. I told her I quit and I left and never looked back. It felt good, but clearly the nurse manager told her, and I got a message saying the usual, "We're sorry to see you go, we thank you for your work," basically normal company send-off. I just ignored it. Since I left, I felt a huge relief off my shoulders. Now I work as a medical teacher, and from what I heard, they ended up going through hard times because so many people quitting, or because of people, tends to be new, not following regulations properly. There were barely any veteran workers. I left at a good time, and though I wish I pushed for finishing the rest of my 2 weeks, I honestly don't regret leaving. Story 55. Worked a temp labor job when I was in college. Most of the work was landscaping, with some occasional warehousing work. Once in a blue moon, you were called in to help with a move. Often at these jobs, there would be several of us from the same agency and we'd talk. Everyone told me that if you ever got a job at the landfill, just say no. Months later, Julie calls me up and says there's a job at the landfill and I decline. Julie assures me that this is just light work, sweeping empty warehouses and nothing more. I'm dubious. Julie promises me it's all fine. I like Julie, and she's been cool with me all summer, so I say yes. I get down to the landfill in Lorton. The guy hands me one of those T-brooms that has like a 3-foot brush at the end and sets me to sweep a warehouse. After that, a second warehouse. Thanks, Julie. Guess the advice I got was unwarranted. Lunch comes and goes, and then the boss man comes and sets me a new task. I'm taken to a room where there are tons of conveyor belts that are ferrying, as best as I can describe it, trash sludge. It's a semi-solid liquid trash that smells like a restaurant trash bin in summer. This sludge, being soupy, drips off the side and, like concrete, sets and solidifies. There were several conveyor belts where the metal rollers were stuck because this solidified trash was gummed up and dried. The dude gives me an ice pick kind of tool and tells me to get to it. The temp agency had one rule they harped on all the time. No matter how bad a job is, just finish the day out, and you don't ever have to go back. But a walkout is a huge issue for them, as they need to provide reliable labor services. I sat in that effing room picking at this solidified trash cement, gumming up the machinery for 4 hours. Oh, and the kicker is, I learned how all these rollers got that way. The conveyor belts above me dripped liquid trash onto me the whole time. My rage grew and grew until I was ready to murder. 5 p.m. rolls around and I GTFO. I called Julie from the first payphone I could find, pre-cell phone days, and told Julie to F right off, and I quit. Looking back, it was the inexperience of youth that kept me from noping out of there right away. I wish I could go back and said F this right away, because at least that would have been a black mark against the company. That a-hole at the landfill knew what he was doing was bullcrap as well, and I'd have liked to say that to his face. Story 56. I was a part-time nanny for a family for a year. 2 girls aged 6 and 8. Parents didn't seem to like their kids at all and really just wanted them to be quiet and leave them alone, so they were pretty spoiled. Anyways, I put up with a lot of crap from the kids, but just dealt with it because I knew it was only temporary and I was paid well. Well, one day the older sister wanted to go into the pool all day, but the dad told me to wait until the younger one gets home. She gets home and refuses to even go outside, even when I told her the sister and I waited all day and I just need to be able to see her while I'm in the pool. She throws a huge tantrum and yells nasty things at me. Whatever. What got me was when the mom came home, the daughter screams, "I never want to see that stupid nanny ever again. She's fired." The mom then coddles her and gives her gummy snacks because she must be hungry. No apology whatsoever. I left and never came back. I can take disrespect from a spoiled child whose parents don't like her, but I can't take a parent not even apologizing for her daughter's behavior and not respecting my own decision-making when I just wanted to keep the child safe and in my view. Story 57. I worked at a Vodafone customer service call center. I had been working there for around 6 weeks and I hated it. It was awful. The managers, most of the staff, were amongst some of the most unhelpful, cliquey-type people I've ever worked amongst. It was a Friday morning and I started at 10:30 a.m. By 11:30, I'd been screamed at twice already by customers who didn't understand why their bill was so high, even though they had been using premium rate services, adult, games purchases, etc. Then this man came on the line and screamed absolutely blue murder at me because it was apparently my fault. Again, his bill was through the roof. He called me stupid, retarded, said I was a no-use waste of space, etc. I asked time and time again for help from a manager who refused to take over the call and stood over me whilst I was in tears on the phone. They then left me to finish the call alone, and this customer would not relent in his berating of me, so I placed him on hold, removed my headset, went over to my awful manager, threw my headset across her desk and said, "F this crap, I'm done," and walked out. I caught the next bus into town and went for a very large, very stiff drink with not 1 ounce of regret. I suffer from really bad anxiety, and the treatment from staff and customers in this job left me in such a bad state after only 6 weeks of being there. No job is worth that level of mental strain. Story 58. I used to work at Burger King. That should honestly give enough reason to quit, to be honest. I had to go in 3 different times for an interview because the manager just didn't show up in the days the interviews were set up. When I finally got interviewed, it was on a Thursday, and the manager asked me to start the next day. I stupidly agreed, despite having to buy my work pants, shoes, and belt all that night before my first day of work. Keep in mind, this was my first job and I was a junior in high school. On my first day, it was a Friday night, so of course it was going to be very busy. My manager didn't train me at all and threw me in front of the counter, which is just cashier with extra things to do. I don't even like Burger King food, so I barely knew the menu, which just made it more difficult for me. I had no idea how to work the computer or the cash register, so I had to basically figure it out. I had no idea what to do because I had absolutely no training beforehand. During the interview, I told the manager the days I would need off for school, family, doctors, etc., and the manager wrote it down on the schedule. After I got the job, I reminded her and she said, I got it. After a week of working there, I asked to look at the schedule, but the manager refused to let me see it and told me when I had to come in and what hours I was working, so I had to remember. The next time I asked to see the schedule, she had put me on for the days I asked off for my school trip. I corrected her and she told me I had never told her and she would take me off if I worked the entire week after that. I agreed and was super angry about it, but I just let it slide. Also, I would be working for 6 hours with no break at all. I was a minor, so that's super illegal. When I told the owner of the store, she put it in the system that I did have a break and didn't pay me for the time I was actually working. Finally, what made me just quit was when I got my wisdom teeth removed. I had told the manager during the interview that I needed at least 4 days off after that, but she scheduled me for 3 days after. I just went in anyway because I had already missed so much work that I had only been working there for a month. I was still on the pain medication for it, so it was super dangerous for me to drive to work or even to work. Suddenly, my mouth started bleeding, and I was super concerned because it hadn't done that before. I told my manager, and she told me to go rinse my mouth out and go back to work. I did, but my mouth wouldn't stop bleeding, and I had to continue to take people's orders with blood running out of my mouth. I asked to go home early because I was getting lightheaded from it, and I didn't think customers would appreciate having someone with a bloody mouth working with their food. They made me stay an hour later than my original time, so I had to work with a bloody mouth for 9 hours with no break. That's when I turned around to them and said, I'm quitting. I'll return my hat and shirt tomorrow after school. You guys suck, and walked out. Story 59. Mine isn't super dramatic, but I'll tell it. I started working as a pizza delivery person at a local place that prided themselves on having a very wide delivery radius. When I interviewed for the position, I let the guy know I was in a band and played regular gigs. He told me that was fine and he could schedule around it. I brought him my upcoming dates on my first day of work and he was like, okay, cool. So I go in on my second day and he has me scheduled to work like almost all of my dates I told him I couldn't, and he just kind of shrugged it off. So I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. So that night was a snowy, wintry night in Northeast Ohio, and I had a delivery to make that was pretty far away to an area I was not familiar with. This was before having a GPS was the norm, and the owner gave me directions on how to get there. The snow really picks up hard, and I got completely lost because the directions he gave me were wrong. So I was already pissed about the scheduling, and then of course pissed that I'm lost and it's snowing effing balls. I eventually found my way back to where I knew how to get back, and I just went back home. Never delivered the food, didn't return to the pizza place. The dude just kept blowing up my phone. I eventually answered so he didn't think I was dead in a ditch somewhere, and just told him this isn't going to work out. I proceeded to enjoy the food that I never delivered. Story 60. I've only quit on the spot one time. In my early 20s, I was a delivery driver in a college town. Lots of drunk money. Loved driving and the job for the most part. My boyfriend at the time worked there as well and had for many years. He was basically family with the manager, although he was a crap person. Well, they both were, but that's a different story. My then BF was having some health issues. He would get pain so bad he would vomit. We went to the ER a few times, but we were just told it was the stomach flu and sent home. Finally, they did an ultrasound and found his gallbladder was extremely infected and necrotic. They rushed him into emergency surgery that night. It's supposed to be a simple laparoscopic surgery, but he had several complications. At one point, his sutures tore while he was sleeping, and he lost a lot of blood. He was in the hospital for about a week before he was released. The nurse administered the wrong anti-nausea meds, and he ended up having a seizure shortly after returning home and was back in the ER. The day I finally brought him home, he could hardly get up to go to the bathroom by himself. I asked the manager for the night off, as he had just hired a few more people, so he has coverage, but he refused. So I told him I wouldn't be coming in anymore and took care of my BF instead. Story 61. First job at Pizza Hut. A group of women come in late at night, and since I was the only server that night, I was forced to take care of them. All is going well. I give them their drinks and put in their order, and then move on to cleaning some stuff on the side while I wait for their food to cook. I give them their food and ask if everything is okay. They say yes, and I go on my way. When they bring their check to the register, they tell me that they refuse to pay for the garlic knots that they got because, quote, no one ordered them. Yet they still ate them, but refuse to admit that. I tell them that I would have to bring up a manager to resolve the issue, so I go back into the kitchen to tell my boss what's going on. She takes one look at the customers up front, squints her eyes, then hurries over to the manager's station where her purse is. She pulls out a small gun and tucks it into her belt behind her back like you would see in a movie. My manager then goes to talk to the customers waiting up front while I'm in the back having a full-on panic attack. I keep thinking to myself, holy crap, there's going to be a shootout in this tiny little restaurant, and I'm literally going to die tonight. I take a peek up front to see what's going on, and you can see my manager and the customers arguing about these garlic knots. My manager insisting that they have to pay because they ate them, and the customers refusing to do so because they didn't order it. Things get a little more heated, and I see my manager reach for her back and think, F me, this is the end. But then she stops, and I think she said, F this, I don't want to go to jail again, moment, and just took the garlic knots off their ticket. Later, when I was closing, my manager tells me that those customers are blacklisted from our delivery service. They were suspected crack house and have threatened our drivers several times, and we should have refused service to them. I knew right then and there that I had to leave and find another job. Yeah, I don't know what's worse, like having crackheads come in and eat your food, or having a boss that carries a gun and isn't afraid to shoot somebody. That's pretty wild. Yeah. Get out of there. Story 62. At my last job, I was working for a company with an office in the US, but whose corporate headquarters and owners were in a European country. For a while, things were going really well, and I was working with my manager to develop the skills necessary to take over her role as engineering manager of our team for about a year. Then, due to backroom politics, the VP of our department changed. The previous VP was a member of our office and knew and acknowledged that our team understood the strengths and limitations of the project we were building, and largely allowed us to continue self-directed with fairly strong usage growth as a result. The new VP, who was based overseas and visited our office about once every 3 months, was convinced that we were all being lazy and or disrespectful, and immediately came in and tried to change the strategic direction of our product, with absolutely no attempt to get any understanding of what we had done or had in progress. This was followed up by demanding that we follow her new vision exactly, despite not being technically feasible in even double the timeline she was asking for. Because we wouldn't commit to these dates, she fired my boss's boss and my boss, and then tried to manage a team of software engineers from overseas without ever actually speaking to anyone. I stepped in and did my best to try and actually run the team to keep the other engineers from feeling as much of an impact from all the disorganization that this caused, and likely kept at least 2 of the other engineers from quitting by doing so. When the time for annual reviews came around, I included this in my self-evaluation and asked to be promoted to the role that I'd been doing for the past 4 months. In response, she looked straight at me and told me, quote, "That is not your job. Please stop overstepping your boundaries. I've noted this distraction from your job, though, and will be providing the minimum merit-based increase that I'm able without citing you for performance issues." My wife, a local pastry chef, baked me cupcakes for the next day for my team, which said "I quit" on top. The entire division was shuttered less than 6 months later, after half of the engineers left and they managed to not land a single new client for the product. I now work at a company managing 2 teams and could not be happier. Story 63. I'm a Photoshop teacher and doing it myself for more than a decade now. Once I went to a seminar of a friend for web designing and saw a student struggling with a tool for 5 to 6 minutes and was doing a very logical mistake, which was eventually giving her not desired results. So I got up and offered her some basic help. And after a while, there was this boy who was trying to get extra smart and trying to get in between our lesson and trying to become a pro. When I asked him why he's giving her a complicated theory of that specific tool, he answered me that, F off, I've been trained by the best person in town. I asked him who he was. He took the name of one of my very honest and kind students. I stayed calm and asked him to call his best teacher. So he did. I asked him to make it loudspeaker, and by that point, almost 20 to 30 people were watching this drama. So when he picked up the phone, I said, "Hi, Mr. X." He suddenly recognized my voice and said, "Ah, good evening, Mr. My name." That wannabe pro boy's face was full red, and after he was thanking for all I did for him on the call on loudspeaker. The boy was red as anything and left the seminar, so technically it's his story, lol. Story 64. I worked at Barnes & Noble years ago as a part-time gig. Thought it would be the best job ever as I'm a big reader. False. They were obsessed with us upselling and selling memberships, which I personally felt was a ripoff. Nor am I a natural salesperson. I just wasn't the best fit looking back. But I did my best and followed all their damn rules. After about 3 months of working there, my manager sat down with me for a performance review and told me bluntly that I wasn't friendly enough with the customers. A damned of a lie. I just felt the memberships were a ripoff, like I mentioned, and that I needed to work on my sales numbers. Keep in mind, I was making minimum wage here. Around that time, my other manager became really standoffish towards me and others who were experiencing the same treatment. She started pinching us on our required breaks, yelling at us in front of customers, etc. I started looking for other work, found a temp job and got hired. Called being in about 45 minutes before my shift started one day and said I wouldn't be in. Actually, I wouldn't be in ever again because I'd found a better job. Peace. Hung up. Felt bad because I know it inconvenienced my coworkers. That was the only reason. F them. They sucked. Story 65. I worked a minimum wage part-time job where the manager expected every employee to show up 15 minutes early and wait in the back room until it was 3 minutes to clock in. I hated this request. I lived less than a mile away and I could just wait at home. I frequently arrived 5 to clock in and I would get rolling eyes and SMH. Once in a while, I would cut it close and arrive 1 to 3 minutes before clock-in time. Needless to say, my manager developed a dislike for me. Eventually, about 5 months into the job, I arrived running and clocked in right on the dot, to which my manager was visibly frustrated that he couldn't say "I told you so." Unfortunately, the next day, I arrived with my usual 30 minutes before time to the store and realized I left my name tag in the car. Told my boss about it and turned around. I came back and clocked in 1 minute past the time he was already writing me up. I was frustrated and asked him why he would write me up over 1 minute, and he replied that I always do this, even though there were electronic time cards to prove this was the first time. I told him it was obvious he was looking for ways to fire me, and I quit. I have the hardest time working for someone that disregards perfectly adequate job performance over fine-combed details like this. Every time you fire someone perfectly adequate, you're taking a gamble with the replacement new hire. Story 66. I worked in healthcare. I was also a full-time student. It was brutal doing 16 units per semester and working 36 hours a week on night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was juggling between a day life and night life, and it was horrible. I did this for 2 years. Fortunately, during this time period, I didn't need the money badly and still had a roof over my head. About 1 year in, I started emailing our director asking for the per diem spot, 1 shift per week, so I could focus on school and 2 other jobs I had. She ignored me. I would email once a month and got flat out ignored for 9 months. We were hiring a lot of new people, and we definitely had the manpower to afford putting me on the per diem spot. At one point, I was so stressed about trying to juggle different schedules, I went to my direct supervisor to see if she'd help me, but she told me to just keep emailing the director. At that point, I had it. I emailed her one last time and gave her 48 hours to reply, and of course got nothing back. The next email was my 2-week notice and resignation. Then I got a phone call saying if I take back my resignation, I can have the per diem spot. I told them no, I was still set on resigning. I'm much happier where I'm at now. Story 67. Yay! Finally, one I have a story for. I worked out in Laguna Beach, California as a server at a local tourist trap, little French restaurant on Main Beach. On Saturday, a few servers told me that they'd be calling in the following day. I didn't think much of it. In fact, I encouraged it because the place was ran by a terrible manager. Sure enough, Sunday comes along for dinner time and those servers called out, but also our bartender, shift manager, and another server decided to leave early as the daytime was slow. I slightly pleaded to stay a little longer, but it did nothing to convince them. Sure enough, dinner time rush comes along and it's only me and one other server trying to take care of a 40-plus table place. Halfway through making cocktails, getting orders and drinks, I realize I'm not making it to tables in proper timing. I went upstairs and noticed two of our three owners enjoying tea and desserts with other local business owners. I politely called one down and asked if maybe she could help me with at least getting drink orders for the remaining 10-plus tables I hadn't talked to. Just want to add that we didn't have food runners, so we were expected to greet, take drink orders, make the drinks, deliver the food, and check in on tables. As I asked for her help, she told me that it was my job as a server to do all those things. I responded a little angrily that while I understand that, her name, along with her brother and sister's names, were the ones on the title to this place, and that she should care about her guest's experience. She responded with, "Please be quiet. I don't want you disturbing our guests." I asked, "Are you really serious? You won't help me?" She reiterated that this is my job to deal with. They had both helped out during slower times, so I was taken aback. I told her, "You know what? F this." Loudly, I may add, and walked to the back to clock out. Once I walked back out to the floor, I handed her my server book and told her there were about 7-plus tables that I've yet to talk to and another 5 that have yet to receive their drinks. Good luck, and walked out on her. While I feel bad that I left the responsibility on my other server, I knew I couldn't deal with my owner's bullcrap anymore. Story 68. Not a very interesting O2 story, but I had just moved to a new country with my fiance. We had very little savings and the job market was a female dog. Took me nearly 2 months to land this very demanding conveyor belt sushi restaurant that just opened as a chef, 30 minutes from our first apartment. My station was so small that I had to T-Rex all the orders and had approximately 200 seconds to complete 24 sushi dishes and repeatedly restock side dishes. I was scheduled to work 6 days a week from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., but sometimes they wanted me in at 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. the next day and made me feel like crap when I said no or asked for one more day off. This eventually made my already delicate mental health shatter even more. They were very strict about bathroom breaks and talking. Anytime I or someone else attempted to talk with a coworker, we were reprimanded. Keep in mind that none of us were culinary virgins. We all had at least 3 prior restaurant experiences, as that was a requirement for employment. What pushed me over the edge was one night a manager in training yelled at me for my incompetence in front of everyone, including customers, and even disclosed my major depression during a rant. I handed her my apron and left in tears and was deemed unfit for employment by my therapist for 3 months. Story 69. I have 2. First one. Worked for a large grocer. My first job in Nashville, Tennessee in the 80s. I was still in high school, pulled a 16-hour shift. Boss asked me to make sure I do this one thing before I leave. I was doing a different job that day because of staff shortage, and was asked to help in another department that day as well. One of my coworkers came in and I asked him if he could perform this one thing for me since I was already in 14 hours and was ready to leave. Coworker assured me it would get done. I clocked out at 11 p.m. At 5 a.m. my phone rings. Now, this is before mobile phones and we didn't have a cordless phone and I was living at home with my parents as I was probably 17 at the time. Angry manager on the phone begins to berate me over not doing the one thing. I was scheduled to be back in the store at 9 a.m. and was the only person scheduled for that Sunday. Before I could defend my position, he hung up on me. I called him back and let him know I wouldn't be in for my shift today or any others ever. He called me back 7 times, pleading with my parents to get me on the phone, and I refused each time and told them not to answer his calls any longer. Never went back. Second, I was a salesperson for an audio-video store, early 90s, commission only in Raleigh, North Carolina. Fellow coworker, also commission only, walks up the steps with a bundle of acoustic roof tiles. Manager tells me to get a ladder and bring it up and start replacing stained tiles while we were slow. I dressed up more than normal that day and had a tie on and a jacket. I told him that wasn't happening. I'm a commission salesperson, would gladly help free of charge after work if I could change prior to doing said work. He called me into his office and yells at me. I can go to Circuit City, the only really large consumer electronics retailer at the time, and hire 3 sales monkeys just like you today. Now, this is the early 90s, and I'm a white dude, but I told him to go for it and got my things and calmly walked out. His manager called me asking for me to come back, and I said not till the offending manager is gone. They fired him 3 months later for a similar run-in with the salesperson and called me to return. I did. I had won several sales competitions to include a trip to the Bahamas, so they were very happy with my performance, other than doing building maintenance unpaid. Story 70. I worked at a condominium complex over 2 summers when I was an undergrad. The job was tedious and kind of boring, but it paid well for what it was, and it was easy for me to get time off. Didn't love it, and my boss was kind of crazy, but I wasn't of the mind to find other summer work. The first summer, I was never late, never called out of work. During the second summer, 2 things happened. First, I got in a car accident, not my fault, on the way to work. I called my boss and told her I was going to be late. She said not to come in and to get checked at the hospital. All well and good. I didn't go in that day. 2 weeks later, I got stupid sick, like acute flu symptoms that lasted for 2 days. Fever reached 102, all that. I could barely move. The first day of it, I tried to call out. She asked me to come in for half day instead. Fine, I went in. Second day, driving was not something I was going to do. I was lightheaded and that didn't feel safe. I called out and didn't take no for an answer. She said my job was up in the air and that she'd call me that weekend to let me know if I was still employed. It was Friday. I shrugged and didn't let it get to me. I really should have quit there, but she called Sunday night and said she'd give me one more chance. Okay, good. I just wanted to work for 2 more weeks before I left for an internship in the fall. I can handle her crazy. She sat me down before work Monday and told me that I need to be a better employee and that in the real world I would have been fired, lol, and cited that I'd missed 2 days of work and that was unacceptable, even though the first day was at her behest because I was in an effing accident and the second day was because I was terribly ill. Whatever, I nodded and didn't say anything. That week we got some trees chipped up and instead of getting the wood chips taken away, she decided we would use them to mulch the property. Cool. This was a massive project that required a truck, wheelbarrows, the whole thing. The pile must have been 20 to 30 feet wide and 6 feet tall. It was a ton. There was a neighboring complex that offered to help us spread if they could take some for themselves. We agreed and their workers came to help. We were using my property's tools and I had to leave an hour early that day. So I did, told her I was leaving, and she told me to have a good afternoon. The next day I come back and she's furious. Apparently the guys from the other property didn't put our tools away. This was apparently my fault, even though I left before they were done spreading our mulch and there were other people from our property who were helping that could have put them away. She ripped me a new one and told me that it was now my responsibility to spread the entire wood chip pile by myself. Remember, this thing was a huge multi-day project for a team of people, and she told me all I got to use was a shovel and a wheelbarrow. She said she needed to, quote, teach me a lesson. I sighed, figured she'd only have me do this for the morning and then lecture me before lunch and then let it go. I did it for 4 hours. Look, I wanted the money, and then asked her before I went on lunch if she was serious about me doing that by myself. She said she was and went into it again about how I needed to learn responsibility and all that. I was done. I took my work keys, put them in front of her, told her, nope, I quit, you're being ridiculous, and walked out. The best part is she called my parents afterward, she was a family friend, to try and get me in trouble. They laughed, and I got to spend the last 2 weeks of my summer sleeping in.